have one of our colleagues who's just getting settled, and that's fine, but we'll begin anyway. I'm sure she'll be ready in a minute or two. That's great. Welcome, everybody. This is the meeting of the Human Resources Policy. I'm sorry. There we go. This is a meeting of the Human Resources Policy and Parent Community Intergovernmental Committee. And we'd like to invite everyone to, well, first we have roll call. I'm very sorry. Would you like me to call the roll? Or how do we do this?
Yeah, we need to.
Yes, because they're trying to make sure they capture everyone,
Okay.
and it wasn't being done, that they didn't want to misrepresent who was in attendance and who was not. So yes, we need a roll call.
A formal roll call, or just take note of who might not be in their chairs?
No.
Roll call? Okay. Would you like me to do that? Or do you have it?
I didn't think I was doing, but I can do that.
Oh, okay. Certainly.
Brandon Foos? Not here. Oh.
Just say here.
Here.
Christine Nyman? Not here. Dave Lewis?
Here.
Ruth Deroff?
Here.
Jill Denon?
Here.
Donna Usavage?
Here.
Steve Alcier?
Here.
Clay Breeze? Not here. And then we have Mr. Boyer.
Here. Okay, thank you very much. We'd like to continue now and invite everyone to rise, if you will, for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thanks very much for that. At this time on our agenda, I'm going to ask my colleagues for an approval of the minutes from September 17. Is there a motion to approve?
Alcier moves.
Thank you very much. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes from September 17. Is there a comment or an adjustment or amendment from any of my colleagues? Okay, seeing and hearing none, I believe it's our policy at committee meetings to approve the minutes with a voice vote. Is that correct? And we'll do that. All those in favor of approving the minutes from September 17, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It appears the ayes have it. Thank you very much. The minutes were approved. At this time on our agenda, we have some time set aside for public comment. Are there any public comment folks signed up? There appear to be no folks signed up for public comment. And at this time, we'll go on to the next part of our agenda, the human resources part of our agenda. We'll begin with a presentation of the results of the PSBA compensation study, and we'll ask Dr. Kim to present that and lead us in that discussion. Dr. Kim.
For tonight's agenda, we will be sharing the results of the PSBA compensation study. And the second item will be substitute teacher shortage and the proposal from the administration, and also the nursing service shortage within our school health services that is impacting our students. We had Dr. Britta Barrickman from PSBA, which is Pennsylvania School Board Association, come and do a compensation study. And it really focused on our support staff and their compensation. And the number of things that Dr. Bergman reviewed under her study were internal equity. Basically, there were a number of compensating factors that she examined, and also the job families in themselves. And also she looked to see, external competitiveness. So basically, how do our school district compensation rate amongst our competing school districts? And we'll go into details, but she did them by looking at the counties, school districts within neighboring counties. Also the methodology and the salary range profiles for different pay ranges. So with respect to internal equities, the support staff compensating factors that she actually reviewed and incorporated into her study were divided into 10 categories. We have the job knowledge, basically looks at, the person in the position, what are their, foundations in terms of how to be able to do that position, perform successfully in the position. Then there's also the frequency of contacts with outside work group. How much of contact do they have in that position? Responsibility for the welfare of others. To what extent are they responsible for and caring for others in their position? And the physical effort that's required in the position, along with the confidential data. How much of access do they have that? And the effects of errors. So in their position, if they make a mistake, what are the consequences and how much of an impact does that have on the others? And also for independent judgment, how much of, do they have within their position to be able to think and make decisions on their own? And the mental and visual effort means, how much of, cognitive profiles are they expected to exert in their position, and also how much of visual effort and analytical demands, how much of data or documents do they need to review and be able to apply and analyze them. And also with respect to supervision, how much supervision does the person in the position need, and how much supervision does the person actually do to others, provide the supervision to others. And based on those 10 compensatable factors, she categorized them into different ranges. So for all of our job families, they range anywhere from range 1 to range 9. And external competitiveness, actually, she looked at primarily geographically, that is very comparable to Boyertown. And there are neighboring neighboring counties and the school districts that are within them. So we have Berks County, Chester, Lancaster, Lehigh, and Montgomery counties. So basically school districts within those counties. And basically who are our districts, direct competing school districts. I can tell you based on the exit interviews that I've done for people, for employees who are leaving, and specifically focusing on the support staff, many of them are actually going to Springford area school district. That is our primary competing school districts. While I know that's in Montgomery County, I think it's hard to ignore the fact that our district straddles between, we have one in Montgomery County and one foot in Berks County. And Springford area school district actually is within reasonable driving distance for many of our employees. So, and they do compensate very well because I am friends with my counterpart over there. So, I do know what they're paying. So that's something to be cognizant of. Yes.
It's also important to note that that goes both ways. When you look at your districts of competitiveness and similarity, it's also where we pull people from also. So we also look at where we are able to draw or recruit people from and who comes to our districts. We actually have a number of people who may drive from Norristown or go to Norristown to commute to us. So you have a number of people who commute in from, so that plays a factor. You're looking at your geographical region that you're competing against also.
Thank you, Dr. Benton. And I do want to emphasize that working in HR, that we certainly recognize that pay is not the only reason that people come to, Boyertown. I've had a number of folks, and primarily professionals, who have said, they grew up here. This is a place they know and they have always loved, and they want to come back. So that is an important piece to be mindful as well. Dr. Bergman shared that her methodology, part of her methodology is to look at, market pay range, looking at the school districts of the 5 counties that we're being compared to. What do they pay? And again, this is based on 2018-19 compensation pay rate, because that's when the study was done. So there's the minimum, midpoint, and maximum. So, minimum is basically what, basic entry-level position would be paid. And the midpoint is, it's actually the market value for the position. Someone who has, some experience, but not at the maximum in terms of their skill sets. And that maximum is, people who are actually, who are considered to be, the masters in their field. That would be the maximum pay range. So again, as I mentioned that, we have 9 ranges. And again, if you look at the screen, it totals up to 199 support staff. And while we use the 2018-19 data from the end of September of 2018, we did factor into, recognizing that we do have a number of employees that have since then transitioned to CREST. So for the purpose of this conversation, we took those positions out. And so these are the remaining, at the time, snapshot of the support staff we have. So, looking at different ranges. I will tell you range 1 is folks who probably have the most influence in terms of looking at those 10 compensation factors. So we have 2 employees that are in that range, all the way down to range 9. We have 85. Okay, and of those, the chart that you see indicates percentage of those number of employees that are below the minimum, and the percentage of employees that are above the maximum. I'll give you a minute to digest. Yes?
I know we talked about this before. Were the 9 ranges merely based on a logical breakdown of, or was there a particular basis for the 9 ranges?
No, it's based on within the 199, job positions that belong in the job families, and based on similarities of their scores or points of the compensatable factors. That's all what drives it.
What dollars and cents do we use for minimum? To understand that chart, you have a percentage at below the minimum?
Yes, I
So
didn't.
what-
So I can share that.
Can we use microphones so
Oh, I'm
that
sorry.
Cindy can pick us up and the audience can hear? Just a reminder.
Okay. So it's not actually included in this presentation, but we do have that data. So to be specific, if you were, I can give you an example. So market range for range 1, minimum is $25.15, and the maximum is $35.21. And the range 9
But
gives,
what would be below the minimum? Is that below 25?
yeah, 25.15, yes. And so for range 9, the minimum, according to the market pay range, is $10.06, and we do have employees that are below $10.96 per hour. And the maximum for that position is $14.08 according to the market pay range. I know. So, and we're very cognizant of that, so we're trying to address it, but we also recognize that this is going to take some long-term planning. It's not something that we're able to address immediately all at once, recognizing the financial situation that the district is in. Again, it's a lot of information to digest. The good thing is, if you were to look at range 1, 7, and 8, we don't have anyone below the minimum, so that's a plus. We also, at the same time, we do have a number of, employees that are above the maximum, as you can see. So based on that, again, these are just some of the recommendations based on the study. It's to develop, as I mentioned before, a multi-year plan to adjust the compensation of the support staff towards market pay midpoint. That includes reviewing the job descriptions and possibly in classifications to make sure that we are accurately capturing the duties and responsibilities. I will say, I'll be the first to tell you that many of our job descriptions are pretty outdated. And, they do need to be reviewed, on a cyclical cycle, and that has not, I don't believe that, attention was given to that. And I think we all have a lot on our plate, so it is something that we just need to be able to do it in a small bits. But that's an important component. And also to review the methods to, how do we move towards making sure that people are, certainly it's easier to move folks that are below to the minimum. But what do we do for everybody else that's above the minimum? So that's something to be considered as well. And also conduct a comprehensive market review. Again, do it on a cyclical cycle. Research says every 3 to 5 years is a really appropriate way to make sure that we stay competitive. And also provide total so oftentimes, when we offer positions to employees, we talk about the pay rate and the benefits that come with that, but we don't really put dollars and cents to the benefits. And I think it's really important to tie that in so that the employees are aware of what it's, how much they're actually gaining in terms of dollars and cents. While it may not necessarily look like that in their paycheck, but that's an important component to share as well. And so that ties into the actual value of the job offer. And I think it's also important for the employees to know that. I think they look at their paycheck but not recognize the fringe benefits that come with the position in the district. And again, pay is important, but I think, having spoken to a lot of our employees, they say it's not just the pay that makes them want to come and work here. It's the interaction that they have with our children that's priceless for them. And we just want to make sure that we continue that path. Yes.
Dr. Kim, will you be talking about a little bit more about the total package, or is that coming later, like you were talking about the total compensation? Will that be part of this presentation
Yes.
today? Thanks.
No, not today, I'm sorry. Because it varies depending on the plans that they have. So what I can do is actually create sort of like a sample total package of, different positions. We could do that. Sure.
Mr. Lewis, I want to be clear, I want to capture on record what is I've uncovered as part of the problem that we actually do for current employees have that ability, and it's actually available to them on real time, anytime they log in. A number of our employees either are unaware or don't use the employee
Access Center.
access center that actually shows your total compensation on it. So one of the things we did in another district is we printed that out for them annually and included it in one of send home, because we don't do mailings anymore, but we annually just sent it out once a year to show them at the beginning of the year, after the budget was approved, here is what it is. What we're going to need to do and try to find a way is to create and write some type of program that when you make an offer or potential offer, you can actually just plug in. The thing that changes is once you plug in the salary offer, we need to create something that generates if you had plan A on healthcare or plan, well, ours is 3 plans, and then would calculate it and show it, the impact of it, which really is not that hard because the software is doing it. Right now, we got to figure out how to pull that out and make it so that it is done for an offer made, because oftentimes they don't see, and I've had to personally advise employees that you may have gotten a raise, but if their health care has changed on you, you actually didn't get a raise if you're paying more than health care. And a lot of times they don't understand that. It actually may be costing you more. And the value add that's always lost, which we talk about here, but obviously I don't think always they see it from a desirable trait of coming to work for a school district, but the cost factor is not understood for PCERS. And what happens to the district in that contribution, what percent the district pays. That's a big chunk right now. I mean, it's like a third of our budget right now.
And it's a big advantage to the employees, so
Yeah.
that's a good trend. Thanks.
Thank you for pointing that out, Dr. Benton, about Employee Access Center. It's always at the start of the school year that our office gets a call. You know, how can I access my EAC? So we often have to unlock and reset their password, but it's really helpful for employees to check that out on a regular basis. And then the next section of the presentation involves substitute teacher shortage and.
Before you go, I want to make sure, because we're changing topics, if there are any more questions.
Thank you for keeping me in line, Dr. Benton.
If you would allow me, let's start with Mrs. Denon, okay?
Yeah, just one comment about the comparisons of different school districts. So we're talking about our paras, not our professional employees, and that's what we're
Yes.
comparing to. And it's just something to keep in mind, because historically, I shouldn't say historically, but I know some people that work in the Springford School District. They actually are applying to Boyertown because their professional teacher salary pay scale, we're
less.
actually higher.
Yes.
Because of our steps and all that kind of stuff. So when we're comparing it, we're just comparing ourselves to Springford
For
on this.
support staff
For
only.
support staff, because I think people, because there is a big difference in support staff, but there isn't a big difference in professional staff. So I think that, you know, in the community, people are like, well, what do you mean Springford doesn't pay as much? But we're talking about support staff.
People.
And that's what this
Right.
conversation
Yes.
is about. And I just want to put that out.
People
Thank you.
often don't really resonate and understand that we actually do have really two major employee groups. And then the third set of employees are not ours, but they're contracted, like our buses and stuff like that as an example. So it is often misleading because you talk about your professional staff more than anything else. And one of the major tenets that the board asked about, and I promised to try to address, was the support staff issue, which, I mean, initially everything I saw before we had the study done was very clear. We have lagged behind in that area. And again, I don't want to be misrepresentative of the fact that it's more than just money, but that's why we talk about, so the public understands, the midpoint and market value. We don't need to be the highest, but we need to be competitive, because we know that there are other things that play a factor also for employees. It does play a factor how the benefits are. It does the culture and climate and how you're treated. Little things like vacation or leave. I mean, one of the things that we had to address was trying to look at what happens on snow days. Well, when you look at the market, how you treat people on that becomes a competitive conversation about, well, in another district I do this or I don't do that. Those little nuances that get to the quality of the work environment. What flexibilities are there that exist with how you use your leave days? And we can't match everything because everybody's dollar for dollar is not the same. But when we run the numbers, we're lagging behind in the support staff. We typically, in the competitiveness, are leaders in the professional side of it.
I believe Mr. Elsier had something.
Yes, thank you. So appreciate sharing this. I know we had Dr. Brickman come in and present to us in executive session, and so I'm glad to see we got something up here. And the the piece on the job market, I think that's important for people to understand. It's not about, it's not even necessarily about what county we're in. It's really, you kind
We're
of take an old
competing.
compass and draw it on a map and say,
Yes.
if you're within an hour or whatever drive time, that is, your market where you can pull employees from. And I think that's important to understand. So we're competing with, some pretty well-to-do, rich districts in Montgomery and Chester County when it comes to filling these jobs. The other thing that I would say, just, I do a lot of reading on the economy and all, there has been a major reset in the job market for, these type of jobs. Hourly employees, and to Dr. Bedden's point, it's not just about the salary, it's about what are some of the other little
Perks.
benefits or perks that you may get that you don't get elsewhere. So I guess my question is, I didn't see, so I got the idea that we have to stair step this. is the next step to give us a plan on, like, what we're going to do this by such and such a date, whether it's over months, years, whatever.
I mean, I don't want to speak for Dr. Benton, but I think one of the things that we really need to do is work with certainly Ms. Pitts, Carol Pitts, our new Chief Financial Officer, as we think about next school year's budget. That's the pivotal time. So we do need to have a plan as we head into that. So, we do want to share that with you. At least, again, it will need to be a multi-year plan to get us there.
Part of, and if you remember Dr. Brickman was here, was the need to have a conversation to address the issue of the approach to those who are under, but we also have to have a conversation about how do you address those who are over, because the trickiness is, as you apply and treat everybody the same, you still keep creating that same problem, and at the same time, there is a philosophical thought that you try to correct this without doing harm. And so, as she mentioned, I think there is for me, it's coupled with the budgetary process, it's a conversation of developing the board's comfort zone with a methodology for not only catching up, but not to exasperate the problem with others still accelerating outside of the market value, because there's a cost factor. But also, you don't want to penalize those employees in the process. So, one of the things I did mention to Dr. Kim, I really would prefer her to come back and with Carol and us sit down and then have a conversation, a plan of action, because there is a knowledge base that has already been here in the state with PSBA and her work. There is a knowledge base that has existed with her being here a couple times, so the board has a relationship and a trust with her. And I think there's some value with a neutral eye looking at this and working alongside of us to create some comfort in this process. So that's been my thinking in it, that how do we address it, not do any harm, but also be responsible, effective and efficient, because we have responsibility to taxpayers. This revealed, obviously, not just a under them problem, but an over problem. But again, you don't want to chase any more people away either in this process. Because here's the other issue that really you kind of touched on a little bit that we talked about is the other issue with support staff, unlike professionals with teachers, they're typically more homogeneous in their comparison, teacher to teacher. So the market is a little bit more narrow in who you're competing against, and districts are pure in that sense when I say a teacher to Springford. But when I talk about support staff, while we can pull data from teachers, for support staff like positions, honestly, some of those positions exist in the private sector.
That's the challenge.
So that's another challenge that we're facing. And then an easy example would be HVAC. Well, and what you're going to see next, nurses. I will tell you that most school districts across the country had very little problem with nurses during the recession.
Yep.
Because the private sector was having to push it down and lay off, and we absorbed a lot of them. But when the economy got better, their salaries are better, so those who like that type of work and can get paid more went back to it. But the same thing is no different than as you work for McDonald's. Believe it or not, at the end of the day, they're paying better than some of the jobs you just heard about, and that's a problem. That so McDonald's is our competitor to some of our support staff with regards to, I guess it would be 9 and the 9 and 8 ranges, for example,
8 and 9
would be a direct competitor. Walmart would be a direct competitor. Dunkin', because they are in that range. So it's not just school districts. Now, she had readily accessible data for that, but we also have to be mindful that we're competing against employment needs of the entire region that we're sitting in.
So to your point, Mr. Alcier, yes, we will have a plan to share as we, definitely go into the budgeting process for next year.
I believe Mrs. Dennett has a follow-up question or another question.
Right, so I promised I wasn't going to talk a lot because we don't want to be here too late, but since we don't have an opportunity to talk about this topic, I just wanted to share that it's and I know we're going to talk about the nursing shortage and substitute shortage and all that, but talking to friends of mine and people who have worked in the elementary schools, and it's not just nurses. So we have traditionally, when my kids went to Boyertown Elementary School, we had playground aides, we have lunch aides, and I think they come in like 2.5 hours, 3 hours a day. And to your point about the market improving, people wanted to be flexible. They wanted to be in the schools when their kids were during the school hours. And now that some of their children are grown, or they can get other jobs with that pay a lot more. I think we're really having a problem filling those positions, and more importantly, when those people are not at work, that getting substitutes. And I think that's a huge issue, especially when you're talking about in the cafeteria and playground aides, because to me it becomes a safety issue. So it is an issue, and I agree. It really has to do with who we're competing with. And we when you're paying $10 an hour, obviously you're not supporting your family on that. So it's just something that people are doing. And I do think the culture of Boyertown is one thing we have going for us, because a lot of people truly want to work in our school district. They like the people, they work here, they stay because of the people. So that is a big part that adds to, they're willing to take less because they want to work in the district and be close to where their kids are. But like I said, I know that we're going to talk about the nurses, but I also see an issue with some of those other jobs, and they are hard to fill, because if you have a job for 3 hours a day, that might not be worth your while, and you're certainly not going to commute 45 minutes to make $12 an hour. I mean, that doesn't really make sense. So I think it's a difficult, but I'm glad to see that we're trying to come up with a plan and analyze and see what we can do. And again, it's no one's fault. It's just how it is.
And I totally do agree, Ms. Dannon. What I will also say that is that, we talked, the rates that the few examples of minimum rates that I share are for our employees. So bear that in mind. So for substitutes, the pay is even a little lower. So that's an important piece. So, when we look at, adjusting the pay rate, we also need to consider substitutes rates as well.
And as you transition, I want to, because you brought up a point that as people see this presentation, the two things that we pulled out that you're getting tonight doesn't mean that we value them more than anybody else. There's become a critical crisis that there has to be some immediate temporary corrective action to try to address it while we try to get to the budgetary process. So I wanted to go on record to anyone who sees this that it doesn't mean that they are not as important to us, but we have some significant items that are happening because of these two areas that actually have the potential to safety, instructional lagging, and or could be a cost factor even later or litigation resulting in it. When you look at some of the challenges, health and safety and wellness with nurses, could be a serious incident that could be a liability. The things that are happening with some of our sub-issues related to our interventions, our special ed situation where we're not having people available for that, and that's an IEP, then that's comp ed, that means more money, and then also you could end up in litigation with that. So just to put context as we talk about these two things, that people don't think we're saying these are more important than everybody else. We're trying to at least create a stopgap measure to cut off some potential bigger issues that could hit the district if we don't take some corrective action.
Are there any members with any further discussion or questions on this part of the agenda, the support staff presentation? Okay, Dr. Kim, can we go on?
Sure, absolutely. Next item is substitute teacher shortage and proposal, and I do believe Dr. Bedden did kind of hint as to the situation we're in. So for this part of the presentation, we're going to focus on, I do have some data from Pennsylvania Department of Education with respect to teacher certifications that they have issued. Also, along with our, district substitute teacher data, and what we're looking and considering in terms of trying to remedy the situation. It's a lot of numbers, but I did try to make them a little bit bigger. So Pennsylvania Department of Education recently started to actually post more of their data. In the past, it used to be, you had to go to one of their presentations and then we give you little snippets. But here, moving forward, they're actually capturing the data that you see in front of you on the screen. So the top cluster of data refers to the number of instructional one certificates that were issued. So when someone is interested in becoming an educator, they're issued instructional one certificate. After years of, they have to have, 6 satisfactory evaluations and have to earn a number of credits. Then they move on to level 2, which is the instructional 2 certificates. So if we just focus on the top cluster where it says, on the far left says year, it says in-state, those are the certificates that were issued to folks who went to the schools in the state of Pennsylvania that actually, educates their students to become, according to the guidelines and standards of the Pennsylvania Department of Education. So if you look, the year 2010-11, the state issued a little over 15,000 level 1 teaching certificates. And then the most recent that I have is 2017-18. It's less than 6,000. So they went down almost 41% in terms of the number of certificates that were issued. 41% in the last 5 years. That's from 2013-14. But if you were to look, back in 2010-11, it's significantly less. So we already know that fewer people are going to education as a profession. And then you have out-of-state data and add-ons, people who are adding additional certs into their already existing certificates. So that's starting number. It's pretty, it's a rude awakening. We have known that fewer people are going into education, but these are hard facts. And as Mr. Elster had alluded to, when the economy does better, people generally don't go into education as a profession.
As a result of the decline, I would tell you the anecdotal information, the number of schools that exist also because they didn't have enrollment anymore, some closed. I think Albright no longer, was it Albright, Alverny? I can't remember which one. So don't quote me. One of those stopped offering the teacher education program. And there were several institutions that have merged and went from a college to a school program. So it's not uncommon now across the country to see a school of education attached on to a liberal arts and sciences college because of the decline in enrollment and people going into it. And 9 Pillars of Successful School Systems publication talks about the fact that challenges, and if you ramp up the rigor and expectations for those programs to increase the quality of people, the problem is the opportunities and the compensation, other things won't match it, so then you still wouldn't be successful in increasing the candidate pool and the quality. So thus, colleges of eds also then end up being stagnant in their approaches, because if you do more, that's going to deter people from going into it even more. And quite honestly, if you just look around the country and the articles that are coming out, and even a number of large-scale strikes that have happened, most recently in Ohio, LA, and then Chicago was just talking about, the roosters are coming home to crow with the profession of teacher profession because they feel ill-equipped to do the job because of constant cutting of resources. The standards are being constantly raised. There's this blame thing about what's wrong with society being dumped on the laps of education, when truly education is nothing but a microcosm. Schools are a microcosm of their community and societies, and that's being lost. And so teachers never really, for the most part, got paid a lot when you look across the board and average, but they were held in high regard in their communities as a profession. Well, that's kind of been lost. The criticism and the type of stress they're put up on there. An article just came out actually said that the teaching profession is one of the ones that has the largest amount of overtime placed upon them to do the job. And you can ramp that up otherwise to the next person, because if the teachers are still around, guess who's still at work? Principals are the same way. Our industry has one of the highest levels of overtime and stress associated with it.
And the next slide that's on the screen is actually the teacher certification data. Again, this one is focusing on the emergency permit. So these are for some, folks who may have had their certificate lapsed. So you could have a valid certificate but not be active. That means they have not met their educational requirements to maintain their certificates, such as 48 hours, which in essence is 180 hours of professional development within 5 years. So they may not have had it, so then they would need to, get an emergency certificate if they want to continue to work as an educator. And interesting to note is that someone with a valid certificate but inactive one can actually substitute teach up to 90 school days in a school year. So that's in case people who are worried and are looking to sub and like, wow, I don't have an active cert, give me a call so we can make that work. As you can see, we have different emergency permits that the state issues. Some where the educational obligation is required, and some that do not. And then there's the emergency permit that is day-to-day substitute, which I want us to focus on, which is permit 006, emergency permit day-to-day sub. So in essence, that's what most people actually end up getting. So if you look at back in 2010-11, we had 12,800 that were issued. In 2017-18, 15,798 were issued. So we, in the past, again, just the last 5 years, from 7,623 to 15,790. That's 107% increase. So, folks may not necessarily be going into pursue a continued education, but they still want to work as a per diem sub. That's what they typically pursue. And also, what's not up there is the guest teacher program. Those would sort of fall in that category as well. So guest teachers program is anyone who actually has a bachelor's degree can currently sign up with the IUs, and IU unfortunately runs it. I shouldn't say unfortunately, I wish they would run more, so we're just grateful they do it twice a year. But they run the training sessions twice a year where anyone with a bachelor's degree can actually go through the training and become a guest teacher and sub. With the guest teacher, one of the sort of misinformation out there is that they're only allowed to work X number of days. That's not true. They can work every student day within a school year. They just cannot work for one particular position for more than 20 consecutive days. And that is still, even if someone has active cert, that applies as well if they are not certified to teach in that particular grade or subject matter. That's all true. So that's just a snippet. Does anyone have any questions about this emergency permit? Yes. I'm sorry.
So just looking at the data, I'm surprised to see that there's been such a huge increase, but yet we're still having such problems getting people. I'm surprised to see this. I thought that it was actually the people who were doing that, it was going down. So is there any reason to that?
Well, I will tell you, when you look at, so the folks who get emergency permit day-to-day subs, what I'm finding out is that even the HR personnel in many of the districts are sort of misinformed about that. And I will just candidly say that when I came to Boyertown, I think it was more of a recent thing where they had every substitute who even had active cert get emergency permit. And I couldn't understand the rationale. I think there were some thought, it's hard to keep track of the days that they're working in a particular assignment if they're not certified in that area. But typically, if you're a per diem sub, you're not asked to work in a particular assignment for more than 20 consecutive days. Those are sort of, HR directors would know. So I was perplexed. But I think the other piece was that I think there was just some misinformation out, even amongst HR personnel, to think that they all have to have this emergency cert if they're not certified in that content area. Even so, just to be clear, kindergarten teacher, someone who's certified in pre-K to 4 can sub at the high school as a per diem sub. That's okay. They can sub for 20 consecutive days in in an assignment that is outside of their content area. That's okay. Anytime it's more than 20 consecutive days, that's an issue. So I think that sort of has driven some of the flaw in that data as well. So, yeah.
So we don't really know how many people are exercising these permits is the bottom line, exactly. But we know that it's at a huge upswing. So.
Yes. Thank you.
You can, just because you get it, to your point, and I give example, when I was in Georgia, they did an analysis of certification of administrators license, and they found that they had more than enough people certified in administration, but they had a shortage of them. But people got it, but they weren't going into it. So getting issue, it doesn't necessarily always translate to how many days or how often you work. So it's a data point to see who's available or eligible, but that doesn't always translate into working or making yourself available. Sometimes it's also a convenience, because if something else doesn't work out, I have this credential at that time. We'll get, and that's not uncommon, I'm not speaking here, a college a student who may have it, and they just kind of pick and choose when it's convenient for them. So, and I do want to make sure on my last comment that when I said overtime, I meant unpaid. Overtime on record.
Well, I was making note of that.
Because in the average in the report said it was like 12 to 12 and a half hours a week more that on average educators were working.
Any more questions on this chart or this
Oh, sorry. I'll
little
go back.
topic before we go on? Okay, Dr. Kemp.
So next slide that's on the screen is the substitute data. And I thought it would be nice to compare the first 36 days of this school year to that of last year. So on the far left side is actually the different absence reasons that were recorded. And this does not take into consideration folks who are on a long-term sub-assignments or extended subs. Just for clarification, extended sub-assignment is when, we have a substitute in an assignment that's that they're going to be in a position for more than 30 days, but less than 90 days. Anything that's, more than 90 days constitutes a long-term sub. So, we have various absence reasons. And if you look, the fill rate for this year is a little over 48. I do want to let Dr. Bennett and some of our administrators in the room, when we actually met, I believe, it seemed like such a long time ago, but I think it was yesterday afternoon, I actually had to redo the analysis because there were some extended sub assignments that were calculated into. So taking them out is actually 48.52% fill rate this year. Last year it was 62.3. So it's a dip, pretty noticeable dip, absolutely. And that's not taking into consideration some of the teacher floats and open positions that we've had. And one of the important things to note is that number of teachers that are out for the same duration of time span, like the first 36 days. This year we had 19 teachers that were out. Again, that would be for extended sub or long-term sub. Whereas last year we had 11. So, Well, I can't exactly pinpoint it, but that's 8 substitute teachers that are already taken up on a sort of extended assignment that's not available to sub on a regular basis. So it all compounds it. And honestly, the ones who are feeling this are our children and our teachers and principals in each of the schools. I look at the data on a day-to-day basis, but being in the central office, I'm not facing it on a day-to-day basis. But having been a principal for 10 years, I know what that feels like, because the first thing you do as you're driving into the building is thinking about how am I going to rearrange, some of the teachers' schedules so that, that our children are getting the educational that they're entitled to and should be getting. So it is a challenge on many levels.
Mr. Chairman, a couple of principals are here. Just in case there was boots on the ground questions you had that we want them to be available to you in the vein of what they're feeling at the building level. It's not required, but I wanted to make sure I requested. They weren't made to, but they are here, so they can leave as soon as we get through this because they got a long day. But I want to make sure they are here because there are nuances. So some of the things they point out to me is we'll have people have selected a day and we'll think it's covered, but then that day, for example, driving in or that morning, what was a covered sub now may have pulled back or gone somewhere else. So they may start a week with, I got sub coverage for all of them, but as the week goes on, people will change their mind and not be covered. One principal, for example, they got people who selected covered, months out already, but the truth is what they're experiencing now that doesn't mean that's going to stay that way. That they may all of a sudden have what was covered become a vacancy the very next day when they may have gone home tonight and been covered and have coverage, but tomorrow morning is a different story. And so again, there's some dynamic. What you will see later is we recognize that there has to be a comprehensive approach. Pay is only part of it. It is not the whole thing. Because we know about the districts that have raised their pay, and it has incremental impact, but not solving the problem. So it's just one piece of the puzzle.
And I'm sorry, I also want to note that, our principals, believe it or not, are actually serving as substitutes in their buildings. Yeah, so, they're not always able to fulfill their administrative responsibilities, so.
Dr. Bedden, were there some principals you wanted to bring forward to say things?
They're all volunteering, I can tell.
They are more so, first and most, to make sure they were here to answer any boots on the ground questions, and then I would just say if they have anything particular they want to share before they leave. But first, they were here more so to make sure the board had access to any boots on the ground questions I asked them to be here for.
Well, I see a lot of hands going up from our members. Mrs. Dearwall.
I just had one. I guess it shocked me to see for the first 36 days of school to have 470 sick days. Is that, I see that last year it was 465.
So it's not necessarily days per se, it's the absence that are required. So some of them could be for half days as well. So it's the number of subs that are required. So even if we have one full day sick, someone who's out for one full sick day and someone who's out for half a sick day, we still need 2 bodies to cover those subs. So that's how we're looking at them.
But even so, it just blows my mind that
Well, we
there's
do
that
have
many.
over 500, I think it was like 510 or 11 professional employees. So, not that they're all going to be out every single day, but
And how many-
mathematically could.
How many sick days do they get a year?
They do get 10. And what someone might think, well, what constitutes other category? That's, when we looked at the administrative notes, it's for different in-district meetings that they may be attending as they're part of, their different roles that they service.
Mr. Foose.
Is there a particular time of year that we tend to see an increase, or is it steady throughout the year, or particular spikes or valleys?
Well, I can tell you, close to holidays, we see an uptick on absences. And when the weather's fabulous, springtime, that happens. And Mondays and Fridays generally tends to be the case. I will say, I think this year, generally, early part of the school year, we don't see a whole lot of absences, but apparently last year we had a lot as well. So, but generally, closer to the holidays and definitely the springtime.
Okay, Mrs. Denon.
So, a couple of things. So I actually, before I got on the school board, I actually was a substitute teacher in Boyertown, and I think it formed a lot of my opinions about education and why I got involved and wanted to be on a school board. So I have some knowledge about, you know, substitute and the fill rate and that kind of thing. So once I got on the school board, I substitute at Daniel Boone, and Daniel Boone historically has had a very large substitute shortage, which of course affects student achievement across the board. So they've done some things to address it. In terms of the sick day, what I did learn is that some schools, not all, but a lot of schools, they have 10 sick days, but the sick days, you don't necessarily, you personally have to be sick. If your child is sick, you can use that as a sick day. And as a result, if you have 800 teachers in a district and over half of them have children, that's why it appears that there's a lot of sick days. Because I was thinking to myself, how can, you know, the first week of school, I get called every single day to substitute, and it's because of things like that. And I don't know what Boyertown's policy is, but I could say that would be the increase in sick days. The other thing about the substitute shortage and the data that and this could not be proven as factual, but I just wanted to ask, when teachers cannot make it to school, do they have to call their principal, or is it strictly the ASOP system?
They do call the building secretaries
So they
and
have,
notify them.
they
Because,
have-
yes, there's a cutoff time on ASOP.
Okay, so they do have to call in the morning to say that they're sick and they can't come in.
After the cutoff time.
What do you mean after?
So if,
Stephanie, can you sit?
go ahead.
Yeah, so,
Do you want to come up?
No, you can sit at the table right here where the two chairs are. Anybody you want to sit in the hot seat?
Mr. Kale is volunteering, I can
Mr. Kale, you
tell.
want to sit at the table, please?
Keep Ms. Petrie
Just press the
company.
mic there.
so,
Yes, push the button.
okay. The teachers can use ASOP, and then we have a cutoff time so that we get a mass email saying this is everyone who's in, this is who's covered, this is who's not
Yeah.
covered. You know, every building is different. I know typically at Gilbertsville, if there's a last minute, the person is sick or their child is sick, you know, oftentimes the teachers will call or text so that we know and we can plan. But after that certain time, they have to call because ASOP won't accept that absence, so that we can respond and make sure we have coverage for when the kids are coming off the bus and we can be prepared.
Okay, so
And, I'm sorry.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
You were asking about sick days, so I'll wait till you finish your thoughts and then I can respond.
So and all I'm saying is that the 5 or 6 years that I've been at Daniel Boone, and I only know Daniel Boone. I don't really know what our process is. It seems, and I have a very good friend who's a secretary there, which is how I ended up subbing there. And it just seems to me that at their school, they just go on ASOP. And they put in, I'm taking a personal day today, I'm taking a sick day today, I'm not going to be in. And they have seen a huge spike in the number of people, teachers who aren't coming, to work, and then they have the substitute shortage. I am not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that is what is happening in Boyertown. I'm just saying from what I know about, outside of a school district and in industry, a lot of times you need to actually call your boss if you're going to be sick or you're going to call off. And I just think that when you do that, if you truly are not sick, or maybe you just need that mental health day, you're going to think twice about doing it when you have to talk to your boss and tell them you're not going to be at school. So, and again, I am not suggesting that is what is happening in Boyertown. I am just saying that I think at some point we need to analyze the data. Is it just about pay? Is it about a culture? Is it about how we fill our system? And to Dr. Beden's point about substitute teaching, you're absolutely right, and Dr. Kim, you're absolutely right. The reason people like to be substitute teachers is because if they wake up that morning and they might have said, oh, I'm going to sub like next Tuesday, and something comes along, it's so easy for them to just say, yeah, I can't do it, or I'm not going to do it. They don't have to worry about a lesson plan. They don't have to worry about, for a lot of teachers that I know, it's actually harder for them to take a day off because of all the work that is involved in taking a day off. So the overwhelming majority of teachers, I think, try to get to work, and some of them when they're sick, which isn't necessarily a good thing either. But substitutes, and there are tons of people like myself who went through the IU and got a guest teacher because I was in the district and they needed help and I did it. Honestly, I didn't do it if I had something else to plan. So I totally understand how we can have that shortage.
Okay.
So,
if I may respond with respect to the sick days, it's no secret that we're in status quo with the association. So the current contract that we're in, even though expired, it's, we follow the same guide as what's in the collective bargaining agreement. It was this contract is the first one in which 10 employee sick days, 3 of them could be applied to their immediate family illness. So it's the first time. So they can do that. So because it says sick days, it's hard to tell whether it's actually the employee or the children. With the other important thing to note is that depending on the organization, sometimes there's strict guidelines about sick days are for when the employee is truly sick. And if they have a doctor's appointment, that if it can be avoided outside their work schedule, that's what they should be doing, and that sick days should not be applied. And I'm not saying that that's the way to go, but there are different schools of thoughts on that, so that's something to consider as well. But I do know that when people have doctor's appointment, they often do use sick days for that. And depending on the doctor that they're seeing, as we all know, if you need to see a specialist, they're pretty strict about when they're available, and you have to cater to their availability. So it's a little tricky as well. And I'm sorry.
Just to put some perspective, when people often, because you mentioned the private sector, and I often hear people say, run it like a business, schools. And I would say to them, from this superintendent's lens, where business practices make sense, we actually do try to do that. But you can't just do it point blank. So for example, in the business sector, you take a sick day, you just take a sick day. For the most part, there's no impact. With a teacher, there's 25 little bodies who are depending on you. So it's not exactly the same. For the concept, and I understand it, like call your boss, but we in education have never had the same supervisory ratio as a private sector. So Penn State would articulate when the MBA program was there that the most effective ratio was 7-to-1. How many teachers you got in your building?
More than 7.
How many teachers, Ms. Petrie? Mike, please. Roughly.
I'm doing my math in my head. Can you answer first?
Over 50
Yeah.
in my building.
Okay.
Sounds about right.
So how many, and how many of those people you have to evaluate each year?
All of them.
Okay. So now tell me what makes sense about that. People underestimate, so you got 600 and something students. 700, yeah, you went up, okay.
Yeah.
702, and you're the only administrator in the building.
Correct.
And then you have 50 adults. Anybody find anything strange and really wacky and wrong with that model? But yet those are our most precious and important people to deal with. They are our current and future investment. And by the way, every time I walk into a private sector business, I marvel at the resources and equipment they have and think, my God, if we had this in schools, what could we do? And by the way, we spend, and I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, but it's near and dear to my heart. We spend usually over $20-something thousand a year to put someone in jail. Maybe 3/4 on a good day, depending on your district, is the same thing invested in to educate a child that actually would not end up in the system that cost you more. It's a wacky system that is not built. In essence, I sat this weekend, and by the way, working on a Saturday, with other educators at a university, and they put up on the screen, the systems are designed, you're getting exactly what the system is designed to give you. And then the next slide said, in big bold words, fail. Because we won't fix our system, and we won't accept the fact that we actually, by investing in education, save money. Educated populations, major universities have proven it in research. Healthcare costs goes down the more educated the population is. Crime goes down. Social services needs decrease. All the things we're complaining about starts in schools. But our system is not designed to be successful. Ask me, how can a person supervise 50 people effectively? And by the way, when a sub is absent, they got to run down and try to cover. So when people say run it like a business, give me the same resources as business, and I'll be happy to do that. I'll be happy to do it. You know, we've got to do something different.
Look, Mr. Elsier has a question or comment.
Yes, maybe a question or comment on boots on the ground type thing. So one, to Dr. Bedden's point, doing something different. I actually just wrote that down on my paper before you said it, because what I'm taking away from this data and discussion is we got to come up with something different, innovative, out of the box. But I guess one question or two questions is, one, what's the turnaround time on a sub? So if you find out you need a sub, I'm assuming it's based on the reasons listed up there. I can see where half of them are kind of last minute, right? Wake up, my child's sick, I call in, I can't make it, or the night before at 10 o'clock. Field trip, obviously, I would think that would be well known in advance, things like that. And then, and maybe it's a rhetorical question, but I got to believe that knowing that nice weather days around the holidays, the need for subs goes up. Is there something that is being done different at those times compared to a normal day? So maybe that's a rhetorical question, but I know in the business world, when around the holidays it gets busy, so you hire more staff and bring in more staff and schedule more staff. So it's kind of like, we know this is coming type of thing. You look at the weather report, it's going to be a 70-degree day, gorgeous. On Friday, you know it's coming, and the odds are you might have a situation. Thanks.
So what I can say to that is that certainly in terms of, trying to recruit and hire more subs, my department, we're constantly scheduling appointments for people to come in. And, I think people are forgetting that there are some required documents that applicants need to submit in order to be employed, even as a substitute. There are all these clearances and 168 forms that needs to be completed. So even, I think there are some still misinformation that, well, I have clearances that are, that I did 2 years ago, they're still valid. Now, when you're looking to be employed by a brand new school district, they have to be less than a year old. And oftentimes, okay, state clearances, easy to get, I could do it instantaneously. It's the child abuse clearance that takes a while. So it takes multiple weeks on a good, if they're on, if they don't have a lot of, applicants to review, it could take 2 weeks. Otherwise it could take more than that. So it's something to be mindful of. And also there's the physical exam that needs to be done along with the TB. Yes, and it's there for a reason, I would
Right,
have
the
to say.
closest industry to us, the only one that comes close, that is always compared to us, is healthcare.
Healthcare.
Is the only one that has all of the hoops and regulations to the level that you see in education, and people often forget that. So it is not just a turn on a dime process, and so that contributes to it. And again, it is still an industry that right now is not, doesn't have the shine that it used to have for people. And by the way, as we talked a little bit earlier, you'll see next, HR is not even just dealing with this. You remember, we have the custodial issue, the nurse issue, and truly, when you really step back, our HR department is one professional, everybody else is support staff. Now, $120 million organization, roughly almost 800 employees, we're bigger than a lot of companies. But we're not built to operate like a lot of companies.
District is the largest employer in the Boyertown area, as far as I can tell.
And I'm sorry, if I may, I do want to say with your point, Mr. Essier, about if if there's going to be, you anticipate absences, what do you do? I can tell you that Ms. Petrie actually has called a number of subs. Hey, are you interested? What are you doing? Come on over. So she, a lot of our principals do make the personal calls just because, they want to make sure that they maintain their positive report, and then trying to encourage them to come on board. So we are trying many different ways.
I believe Mr. Foose had his hand up, then Mrs. Hughes Savage. I think I see. Is your hand up also? I think his is up. Oh, I'm sorry, his is up.
I was curious if we, do we incentivize or compensate reliability for substitutes? Like the more frequently you...
It's coming.
Okay.
It's part of the plan and the conversation.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Ben, I liked I think you called it a tirade, but it was a really good statements that you made. I think what's in the best interest of our students, our buildings, our personnel, our financial status, and our taxpayers is having the teacher in the classroom. And I've challenged the board and the administration in my whole 10 years here to think about how we encourage people to be present. But there are so many constraints regarding the state rules and everything around that. So it's a really difficult thing to do, but I hope we continue to think about ways to do that. My question about the substitutes was, when I look at the different reasons, of course, the big majority are things you can't plan for. Mm-hmm. But for the things that we plan for, like field trips or meetings, are we trying to engage subs well in advance? Because it looks like we don't have any better luck finding subs for those categories.
I think one of the things that we are looking at is, again, as I think Dr. Ben and some other folks have said, substitute may decide, oh yeah, I'm gonna come to you on that day, be your sub, but then they may decide for various reasons not to, decline to, continue with that job. So that has happened. I think the other piece that we're looking at as an administrative team is that, not only due to transportation, but also with the subs, certain meeting dates, avoid Mondays and Fridays that are more challenging to fill. So they are looking at multiple ways as well.
So when we think about how we compensate subs, I think that's going to be coming up, but can we reward them for not reneging on a commitment?
And I think
I know that there's a shortage, so we don't want to say you can't be a sub if you reneged on your commitment, but
I know, we don't
maybe
want to do that.
reward those that don't, right?
And I think I think when we look at it's actually the next slide about the compensation component that is sort of tied into that piece. Hopefully it's a little bit more clear, but yeah, certainly that's a conversation.
Well, yes, Mr. Foos again.
Is there any type of, like, I know that there are different services that you can use for substitutes, but is there like an Uber of substitutes? Because if there isn't.
No, not, so there are third-party agencies that actually, provide substitutes to various districts, but they're not necessarily doing any better in many ways. Certainly, it's, I'm not going to deny if that's the direction we go, because that will just help alleviate a lot of the work on my staff. But I'm not so sure, and I'll candidly speak from experience in my previous district, where we could afford to go to the third party. We've interviewed lots of agencies, and at the end of the day, we decided not to go with them because we felt that the in-district the employees in the district and HR could actually be able to provide that sort of customer service that we can better control in many ways.
Yeah, so just to chime in what Dr. Kim said, I work for Dan Boone. I actually work for Precision HR, so they outsourced it, and their fill rate is actually worse than it was when they got it. And the reason is because of what Dr. Kim said, the personal touch. Like Mrs. Petrie, you're calling people up. And the same thing with me. When my girlfriend calls me up and says, "Can you please come in?" It's really, really hard to say no. And I think that we used to have Boyertown, before we went to ASOP, on the flip side of that, Boyertown used to have a substitute caller. Well, you got a relationship with that person. You knew them. They lived in their community. So when they picked up the phone and called you and said they were desperate, you said, all right, I'll come in. Where when you're just kind of going to a computer, I think on both ends that has contributed to people not doing it. And to Dr. Beden's point about managing all the people in your school district, I mean, the last thing we really want is our principals having to call substitutes and having to make those calls. I mean, that shouldn't be within your job responsibility. But and I don't want to add on to Dr. Beden's tirade, but it's a huge. It's not just a substitute problem. Let's face it. It's a systemic problem in how we value teachers and education in our society. So.
Okay, well, if there's no other discussion on this chart or this particular specific issue, Dr. Kim, would you like to go on?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Okay, come on, work with me. Okay, so again, consideration for the board, in terms of addressing the substitute shortage. Bear in mind, in the bold print on the upper right-hand side says still conducting financial analysis. Just because we haven't been able to crunch out all the numbers that will fit within the approved expenditure at this point in time. So we're conducting. Yes. So I apologize. So I will attach this one. So one of the ideas that and when I say the administration team, we did consult with the elementary principals in particular, because they were feeling, not that the secondary folks weren't feeling the pain, but I think they were feeling it more because they're dealing with the little ones. So we had a meeting, and one of the things we did discuss was, increasing the per diem substitute rates. And we were considering the tier model approach to retain and attract more substitutes with again, we want to stay within the approved expenditure. That's the tricky piece. And we recognize that as an administrative team that increasing the pay rate is just one of the strategies. It's just one piece to the puzzle. So currently our per diem substitute teachers and building subs make the same amount, which is $110. So just to clarify, building substitutes are substitute teachers who are assigned to a particular building and that they report to that building every single day. And what I will say is that last year, one of the things we had an understanding with the building principals was that if for whatever reason that their building sub was not assigned to filling a teaching position in their school, that they would be reassigned to another school where there was a vacancy for a teaching position. Again, that's for elementary building subs would just be reassigned to the elementary schools, and the same with the secondaries would just be reassigned to the secondary. And honestly, that rarely happened except for the smaller buildings. When that happened, so they were reassigned, and so a person in my department would monitor that, and it was like before 8 o'clock she would send a list, because she would look to see when there was when the building sub in a particular building was not assigned to covering a teaching position. So what we have proposed is that increasing the base rate to 120 for per diem. And building sub to 135. And if you do the math, for $135 divided by 7.5 hours in a day, that's I think about $18 an hour. If it was 110, I think it was below 15 an hour. And understanding that these people are actually caring for and educating 25 students, sometimes more, in a day. Serving, oftentimes not just as a teacher, but also, local parentis, meaning parent on site. They have a lot of responsibility, so increasing that a little bit. And then what the tiered system is actually trying to have them commit to our school district for long haul after serving for, 30 school days, give them a slight more increase in a school year, and then, up to 60, possibly, a little more. So that's, again, it's a proposal. We're still crunching the numbers because we want to make sure that we stay within the allotted expenditure.
And I want to highlight that last part because as our fiscal watchdog back there in the corner, as we were trying to figure out how to solve this problem, because I met with her one-on-one for the principals, she reminded me that by law, you can't exceed your expenditures. Even if we had new revenue, like, to our fund balance, you can't exceed your adopted expenditures without opening the entire budget again. And we're looking at some things that, with that additional savings, like what do we have any ability if we get less money required on the bond situation, but we got to get some rulings on whether that's fair game or not. So at the end of the day, what I want to say to the taxpayers and what we said to the principals yesterday is we still got to do this and try to live within our means of and that's what we're trying to figure out, which means, and I'm just going public, that means something has to be moved from somewhere else to do this, that we can't. Carol assured me that she can't print money. I've tried, like, can you print some more money for us? So for someone who's seeing this chart, we're not trying to figure out, we're trying to do this within what we've been approved by you all, or anything that, and if something has come up where we save somewhere, Carol has to get a ruling. I talked to her today with some stuff she found from Mr. Sultanic to see if that's doable. So it's still living within our means, and share with the principal. That means, and teachers, I want them to hear something has to give. If we try to, so we have to do some things differently, and that's going to happen. So when I know they get upset with that counter thing that shows up with the paper, but I'd rather spend it on this than paper, for example. And we're not saying they can't print. What I keep reminding them when I run into them, when that thing hits your limit, it just means you need to send it to the print shop. Not that you can't print. The print shop will print it for you. So we didn't say you couldn't print. The print shop is less costly per page than what it is in our local printers, for example. So when everybody hears that, we didn't say they couldn't print.
So I like this idea, and this is where you could build in the penalty for reneging. Maybe it's 30 days without reneging, or 60 days, or you get a 2-day penalty every time you renege, or something like that. And
absolutely,
really, because then you're attracting, you're encouraging those that are really committed and saying yes.
I believe
Mr. Foose was next, and then Ms. Darrell.
I don't know if we had explicitly covered this or not, but the numbers that we have where we're not filling a sub, where there's an absence, what's actually occurring in that classroom?
Why he's coming here too, that I want to go on record, because I don't know if do you have it yet? We again, this is a piece of a puzzle. We ask principals to come up with doing some things differently, and so there's some other things.
There's the next slide on
Okay, all right, so you do, so I don't want you to think we're just coming and saying, we want to change the pay, and then we don't do anything else. That's not the answer to this problem.
So currently, what's going on is there are different teachers in the building that work with small groups of students, intervention teachers, reading specialists, that would be pulled from those groups that they're assigned to work with on a daily basis to fill in for, say, a first grade teacher that's an unfilled substitute position. You have to take from somewhere to try to fill another position. There may be classrooms where there are two teachers co-teaching going on. If one of those two teachers is out, that position may just go unfilled. So in certain situations, we're able to reallocate some of the resources or some of the teachers we have in the building and pulling them from certain groups to work in a classroom. In other situations, they may just be unfilled.
We'll share the negative impact of the intervention schedule, what is happening.
When those intervention teachers are pulled away from those students that need some supports in the area most of the time in reading, those students then go unseen that day. They would remain in the classroom because there's no one that can work with them. Now there are situations where we'll combine groups sometimes, so you may have two separate groups that 5 kids here, or 5 students here, 5 students here. We pull an intervention teacher to go to first grade. Now that group becomes a 10, which is not ideal. Or, you know, I know Mrs. Petrie and the other principals, we talk about trying to fill in when possible. That's not always the best situation either, but it's some of the things that we've tried.
Another hiccup that you run into, if there is a key team member so we're dealing with IEP or interdisciplinary team looking at, and then they can't hold a meeting. Because you don't have the makeup of the team to do that, which has a schedule and a timeline that's supposed to happen. And then if they miss a service, then you get into the ability, if we can't figure out how to make that service up to meet what was put in that student's IEP, then you're gonna start talking about comp ed, which either could be we got do an extended school day or extended school year, but that's not easy because you got parents in their schedules too, which could lead to additional compensation required, because now if you got to extend a year, someone has to be employed to do that service. So that becomes a cost factor. And if you miss all those, then you got a compliance issue. That could be they get the chance to make a request, and of course we can deny it, but then they may get placed outside. Now, that's an extreme example, but that could get that depending on how aggressive and or combative the situation is. You know, if you want to.
Just to add with our intervention team, you know, they design targeted interventions to help support students to fill in those gaps. So these are students that are in the regular ed classroom. It's during our scheduled, at Gilbertsville, it's our win time, and it's called What I Need. But the goal there is to help fill those gaps and get the students so they don't need that extra intervention, and also to avoid maybe that need for additional supports for learning support. So when that intervention is interrupted, that program, they can't follow it to the integrity that it needs to be followed, and then they have those gaps aren't getting filled on a consistent basis. So it makes it very hard to meet those demands of the needs, and you know, the teachers will still be seeing them in their classrooms, but that targeted intervention that child needs just to get that little bump to get where the grade level is getting missed. And at Gilbertsville, all of my intervention teams have subbed at least 9 days to some capacity, whether it's a part of a day, and that's a lot because we're only in October. So it really, when you think about the amount of kids that they don't get to see, it really is disheartening, and really we just feel like we can't service the kids as the way that we need to.
I believe Ms. Deeroff is next.
Don't we currently have a rate of pay for short-term and long-term subs?
So we have
So I don't-
extended subs and long-term substitute teachers, but they're not per diem subs. they're assigned to serve, like, let's say we have a teacher that is out for half a year.
Right,
for
I
writing
realize
exam.
that, but I didn't see any pays up there. Shouldn't that be also into the mix?
So that's, so long-term sub, they don't serve as a per diem sub. So I did not include, but I can tell you, long-term sub pay is $216.44 a day. And extended sub is $175.
Okay, so that, okay, I just want to make sure
Absolutely.
we're not,
No, we're not forgetting them, absolutely. I will say with respect to long-term substitute pay, the figure's a little odd, but I kind of suspect in the past it was probably divvied up on a base, step one of some sort of a salary range and came up with that number. There are lots of places that have a higher rate for long-term sub, and some places will just use a step one of a bachelor's or something of that. So I wouldn't say that our long-term sub is the most attractive.
Mrs. Denny.
So just going back in terms of the budgetary issue, so not that this is what we want, but we have, a fill rate that is an unfilled rate. So for every substitute that doesn't come in and we're using our own personnel, we're saving that money. So, I mean, does that go into your formula or no?
So let me make sure I process. Remember, even when someone's out, we're still paying their salary.
Oh, I understand
So
that.
you say saving the money, when you say that, what do you mean?
For the substitute teacher. So like, for example, if we have 90, where's the subs aren't filled. So like if we have 21 teachers absent and we only fill 6 substitutes, we really want to have
Right,
fill
but-
all
but-
21 of
right.
those. So we would have been paying
Right.
another 15
But not
people.
quite, because
Okay.
here's, on the budgetary process, and we talked about that yesterday, you budget based on your trend data of what you actually have been spending and try to adjust. If we had filled every one of those, we'd actually have run out of money in that code. And if you budget as if you were gonna fill every position, and then we know we don't, then you will always have excess in that pot too. So to be, again, fiscally accountable and responsible to the taxpayers, right now, the budgeting has been on the trend data. And so we spent, what was it, Carol? 530, yeah. And we budgeted, what, we were like, we were $6,000 short,
Last year's budget
yeah.
was $540,000, so we were pretty darn close, on just substitutes.
Okay, thank you, that
Right.
explains,
So-
that answers that
so
question.
it's trying to-
I didn't know
to-
that's how we were budgeting.
Yeah,
Okay.
because you could say, look at the numbers and then budget that way, but it gets a little, so it'd be a methodology conversation with the board to say, how much of true do you want to budget for? Because you also don't want to give the perception you're padding your budget.
Okay, thank you, that answers that
So
question.
it's a little, but the issue became when I asked them to show me the numbers, the question becomes, were we going to run out? And that's why the hard numbers show we're kind of similar to where we were last year, so we're on track, but if it picks up, then you went into the issue of potentially running out, but then that's a case where you'd have to tap in either some other source and move it, or then your fund balance would be used because you're not exceeding your expenditures. So with that knowing, and then, the case, they have tried to budget more realistically, so it doesn't look like you're padding your budget, creating a cushion that never comes to happen because, the only thing we budget truly what we need is a full-time staff, which is how we had the vacancy savings and turnover, because our goal is always to make sure we are staffed the way we budget it, but not on the sub side, we take a different approach and look at the trend data. Now, when that goes up, we'd have to increase that line item as we improve upon it.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna make that similar point. So if our ultimate goal with this problem is essentially to improve the fill rate, which would then change those trend numbers over time, which is something we'd have to adjust for budget-wise. However, as we just, heard firsthand from some of the principals, that this low of a fill rate is having a negative impact on the services we provide to the students. So we need to balance that, and it's obviously a much better situation for us to improve this fill rate.
We discussed yesterday in the meeting with them, like having, what a target rate. Well, we know that we were at 60-something%, we're at 40, so we would like to have at least a 75% fill rate as a realistic target, because that's not that far from 61. It's a big jump from 48, but we know we've hit 60-something, so 75 is not a bad target, and we're trying to figure out ways to answer there, which means we would ultimately have to then increase that line item in the process, but that's not exceeding our expenditures. Then you could come back to the board and say, if you had to, do something, then you tap into your fund balance. But then we know why. But we can't intentionally add a expense on because of what the code is that Carol shared with us, that we can't exceed the approved expenditure amount. Did I say that correct?
If there's nothing else on this, Dr. Kim, can you go ahead, please?
Sure. Okay, other considerations, and ideas from the administrative team is that, certainly increase the number of building substitutes based on the FTE counts of the school itself. So, we have, elementary schools that are tiny compared to much larger schools, yet they get the same number of building subs. And so, based on the FTE counts, or, I think at the elementary level, we have a term that we use, number of units in each of the schools. So, bigger schools like Gilbertsville, Boyertown, New Hanover, and Washington would get 2 building subs, as opposed to the other schools. And also, while high school gets 2, I know Dr. Foley's in the audience. Well, if we're looking at the FTE counts, I should be getting 4. I'm sorry, we won't be going that direction, but.
Dr. Foley, but we talked about you and the flexibilities that will have a little bit more
At the
advantage at
secondary
secondary level compared to elementary. So we'll talk to you offline.
Okay. And so we'll be considering that for the middle school as well, both middle schools. So that's one of the recommendations that we're. And also the second one talks about sharing the responsibility of educating all of our students. Right now, when there was when we did not have subs to fill in as a classroom for classroom teachers, it has been primarily the reading specialists and intervention teachers. We're looking at other building professionals that are certified instructors from PDE who may be able to assist in sharing what I call the love of filling in as substitutes. And also our district so-called guest teacher program, as I mentioned earlier, right now we are affiliated with the BCIU, and they run their guest teacher program twice a year. And we're talking to the Office of Teaching and Learning to talk about how we can do our own so that we can provide the trainings, and then we can run it more than twice a year. So that's something we're exploring as well. And then also possibly providing incentives when and as a collective group from the association that the absenteeism rate decreases. We're exploring that as well. So there are multitude of ideas that we're considering, recognizing that increasing the per diem rate is just one piece of the puzzle.
What's not up there is we did, and I left a message, hadn't heard back, and I don't know if it's the right number, but you sent me the other number, is our desire to try to go and meet with the Retired Teachers Association and dispel some myths, but also see where we can get a plan of action that may include them as a solution to some of the problems, and also feedback for those who may be subbing. Or is there another issue that we don't know about? That why people may not be picking up the jobs? Is it mythical? Is it real? So we have talked about in trying to connect with them to have a meeting with them.
We have some questions from our members. I saw Mr. Lewis first.
Thank you. Quickly, Can you refresh my memory about the guest teacher program? You said BCIU, and they run it several times a year?
Yeah, so most of the intermediate units across the state actually do run guest teacher programs, and they do charge, depending on the IU, some charge like $75 for anyone who's interested in doing it, and some charge as low as, I believe, $35. So in essence, anyone with a bachelor's degree may sign to become guest teachers, and they go through a training that's roughly anywhere from 2 to 2.5 days. They go through, they get trained for mandated reporting sessions, also opportunities to go into a classroom and observe for half a day as well. That's typically in the guest teacher program. And then, but more importantly, from our educators and administrators about the expectations of what it's like, and also teaching them about classroom management, just the nuts and bolts of delivering fundamental instructions to kids, how to greet them, and if you're working with like kindergarten kids, as opposed to standing up, just kneel down and just talk to them at the eye level and things of that.
So they try to retrain people like retired engineers.
Yes.
Mr. Lewis, there you go.
I saw a hand over here. Yes, Mr. Elser.
Yeah, so just a couple quick thoughts. So appreciate the update, some good ideas there. The one you mentioned about doing a guest teacher day here, I know that in the private sector, a hiring day, so to speak, or two, just to bring in subs. If there's an employee in the district who recruits somebody as a sub, is there a bonus for that employee?
A referral fee?
A referral fee? Bonus?
That has not been taken into consideration. So something we can explore, but
and that could be any employee. So if I'm a support staff, a custodian, a teacher, an administrator, and it's got to be somewhat substantial. And then if that substitute teacher stays, so maybe it's $50 or $100 if they come in and they get hired, and then if they stay with us 60 days, maybe there's another $50 or $100. So there's an incentive there. So that's another one that might be worth considering. And then, this may sound a little hokey, but that's okay. What do substitute teachers do for lunch? Do they go to the cafeteria, pay for lunch? Or?
Oh my God, I brought that up amongst some of my team, and
there's nothing like a free meal.
That too.
And when you look at the food cost of that meal, it's pennies, but it's the gesture of, hey, if I sub at Boyertown, I get a free lunch in the cafeteria. Food for thought, pun intended.
No, I had an interesting conversation with Ms. Pitts about that. Not that I want to put her on the spot, so it was an interesting reaction I got. So.
Local business donation cards from McDonald's.
Well,
that's
that's another one.
There you go.
Reach out to local businesses.
Yes.
You can get movie tickets at a reduced fee for the tickets, where you pay a nominal fee, and then you get 2 movie tickets when you sub at Boyertown. So there are numerous things like that. Thank you.
Mrs. Denon had a hand up.
So I do really like the idea of bringing the guest teacher program here, because I think one of the drawbacks is that you have a lot of parents who have kids in the district and they're looking for something to do. They have bachelor's degrees, but they can only get to that program twice a year. Mm-hmm. So if they miss it, I think it was September and January. I don't know what it is now. So I think that might really that's a great idea, and that might really help us out. But the other thing is a lot of people, and I learned this when I went through the IU program 12 years ago, there were maybe 50 or 60 people in that room. And there's a good percentage, I don't know what it is, but I was substituting with people, and then I didn't see them anymore. And they were like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. So people think, oh, substitute teacher, it's so easy, you go in. You really, there's a certain personality you have to have for that. Some people do not handle getting called at 6:30 in the morning and then going into a classroom of first graders, and it's not as easy as people think to do. So some people do it for one or two times, and then they never do it again. And there were several people that I talked to, and they said, oh, no way, this isn't for me, I can't do it. And so that's something that I think we don't necessarily acknowledge about substitute teachers. People think it's so easy, you don't do plans, you just show up. It's difficult. I mean, it's not that easy. And, you know, and I'm not as involved in it as much, but honestly, you feel so much more responsibility now when you go into that classroom as a substitute teacher. You know, the fight or flight drills, the, you know, fire drills, the safety things, it's much more stressful than people think. You have 25 little kids in your class that you're responsible for that day, and you might, you know, there might be some children in that class that have issues. You have to look, you know, peanut allergy, whatever it is. And it's a big responsibility. It's a really big responsibility. So I think we miss that when we talk about, well, why can't we get them? Because it's not necessarily a plush, easy job to do. And, you know, not everybody's cut out to do it.
Thank you. I think you're right. It's very difficult. It is. It's not easy at all. Mr. Foos is next.
Do we do any type of evaluations of substitute teachers, and is there any type of incentive to rate well, like the comfort of, I'm going to be out, but I know this particular sub can handle whatever lesson plan I had for the day, versus I'm going to be out and I don't know what they're going to get, so I'm just going to throw together something that's pretty simple?
So through our online frontline ASAP system, our teachers can evaluate like the star rating system, and they could also have the subs that they prefer on a preferred list for the schools. That capability is available.
So perhaps in the tiered model, also considering incentive for being on that preferred list.
Absolutely.
Well, if there are no more questions or any items for discussion regarding the substitutes, unless Dr. Kim has something else, otherwise we'll go on.
Yeah, so what I wanted to say, Mr. Boyer, is that, you know, once we crunch the numbers and make sure that the proposed rates are can be done within the approved expenditure, we'd like to bring that forward at the next board meeting. Again, we will share that information, you know, with the board prior to the board meeting, but if it's all feasible and we can be done, that's the direction we want to move to. So I think this is where we do thumbs up, thumbs down,
Sure,
to move forward.
Well, what we could do is if there's no objection or to doing that, to bring it to the next meeting, I mean, is there objection to bringing that forward at 22nd you're talking about, October?
Yes.
And what are you bringing? Just a substitute? You're not being clear what you're bringing.
So I think the rates, the proposed rates for the substitute teachers, the increase in their rates that's been up on the slides, if they are, you know, can be fit within the approved expenditure. And we will share that with you if it fits. And then if it fits, we want to bring it to the next board.
Any objection to bringing the rates forward to the next meeting? And the other items that Dr. Kim mentioned. Okay, well, let's take it forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Next one is on the same topic that's sort of trending, nursing service. I did share with the board in the last board report, you know, that school health service are, you know, required by the school codes, Pennsylvania school code. So basically, you know, thank you. According to the school code, you know, public school districts are required to provide school health services. So in essence, we have to have a certified school nurse for every 1,500 students. And even if we have students that are attending private, parochial, we still need to service that, even if they live within the school district boundaries. And so with that said, you know, ideally they said it's ideal to have one certified school nurse in every building, but they also recognize that's impossible. I don't know of a single school district, unless it's one building school district where they have one certified school nurse. Other than that, it's a combination of, certified school nurse that is at least assigned to a school building at least 1 day a week, if not more. But then oftentimes it is a licensed practical nurse or registered nurse that actually services on a day-to-day basis, and they work under the supervision of certified school nurse. And that tends to be the model, and that's the model that we have in Boyertown as well. Now, so when the required health services are not met, it does expose the district for liability. Case in point, certainly the healthcare needs are not being met. And, unlicensed personnel might be trying to administer medications, and errors could occur. And also, speaking of errors, could be the missed dosage, giving it to the wrong students, not intentionally, but accidents do occur, so we want to minimize that. And researchers have shown that medication errors increase when medications are administered by unlicensed school personnel. I think in the old days, building principal could administer certain medications or something like that. Not anymore. That's not permitted. And also, treatment for illness and injury and chronic care might be missed or delayed. So it does pose liability challenges on the district. Furthermore, the assessments and treatment for adverse medication reactions are going to be either missed or delayed. And students with special care, health care, as identified in their IEPs or 504 plans, it's creating an increased risk of violation of federal and state law, which ties into what Dr. Benton had alluded to earlier, that it does put the district in terms of, comp ed service for that. And, it's litigation if we're missing out on, if we're not meeting the healthcare service within the school districts. And controlled substance may not be monitored and secured adequately. And then, our nurses have a huge responsibility in documenting the administration and treatment of students. So that may be either missing or incomplete. With that said, we currently have 12 staff nurses, and one is actually is vacant, and we have not filled it yet. So we should have a total of 13 staff nurses. And what you see in front of you on the left side is the market pay range. Again, that is based on Dr. Britta Barrickman's 2018-19 compensation study. Okay, the minimum, mid, and the max ranges from $21 to $29.40. Again, that is the 18-19 rate. And on the right-hand side is our current district staff nurses' compensation. And bear in mind, please, that those rates are, those employees are actually, since then have transitioned to CREST, but those are their pay rates. So we have 3 staff nurses whose rates are anywhere from $21.53 to $21.96 and so forth. And the highest pay that we have is $25.44. Any questions on this? And again, we have 1 vacant position that's not added in that. Currently, we have, 8 out of the 12 staff nurses have been with the district for 8 years or more. And I think we have one that's almost 19 years. So it is a very committed group of folks who are dedicated to making sure that our students' school health service needs are being met. And on the bottom shows you the repeat of the market pay range, minimum, mid, and maximum. What Dr. Ben had also alluded to the fact that there are certain positions that service the school district where we're competing with the actual industry, private sectors. We have some of our staff nurses that are being they've gotten job offers for private sectors where they're being offered $10 more an hour than what we're paying. And, you know, but I also shared with you in a weekly board report a couple of weeks ago as to what some of the other school districts are paying. And our staff nurses are underpaid. And also, you know, recognizing that a number of our staff nurses are being recruited to go with the private sectors. We like to, you know, propose compensation of $25.50 for them, for all of them to be moved up in that direction so that we can retain who we have, because they are a really committed group of folks.
Okay, I see Ms. Dirov's hand.
With the amount for private industry, I'm sure they're not getting the same insurance. I'm sure they're not getting the same PSERs when they retire from there either. I mean, I thought we were like trying to sell the whole package when we hired someone.
That would have been true, Mrs. Dirov, if they were with us, but these folks are no longer with the school district. They have transitioned over to CRES.
Well, Chris didn't tell us there'd be a problem with this. A shortage that we couldn't get people, we had to give them more money. They never mentioned anything about the staff nurses not getting paid enough.
They partnered with us knowing that they would be inheriting our pay rate. That's the understanding. And they have actually spent quite a bit of time and energy and money in terms of posting vacancies through different medium.
What pay do they currently pay their other people, their other staff nurses at other schools? Don't they have one salary for?
No, they're only paying whatever the district that they're working with. So if they're working with Great Valley sets the rates for them. And because Boyertown staff nurses are through Boyertown, and they actually worked with us and they've transitioned to CRES, they're being paid the rates that we set.
Oh, someone's over here. All right, we'll go to Mr. Lewis.
This is an easy one. We had differentiated CSN, certified school nurses, from other nursing staff. Are those 8 the CSNs?
No.
Or, no, they're just...
Certified school nurses are part of the professional group.
And now we have a question for Mr. Elsie.
Yeah, so, you know, similar to the support staff and some of the other things we've been looking at, and this was one of our priorities this year as a board, was to look at support staff pay, including custodians and school nurses. So irregardless of CCRES, the pay, they're not even at midpoint. I think we had one nurse at midpoint.
2.
Or 2. So what would be the total dollar effect on the budget then?
So if we did move all 12 up to $25.50, I think based on the figure that Ms. Pitts had provided was roughly $35,000 for the rest of the school year.
Okay, that's the figure I thought I saw. I just was looking, I couldn't find it. But okay, so $35,000 in the total budget.
Yes, and so with respect to in terms of planning for next school year budget, we just need to make sure that can be incorporated into that. I think that was the conversation.
And that can be, maybe it's a question for the CFO, but that can be absorbed somehow in the approved budget for this year?
Yes.
I'm hearing a yes. Okay, thank you.
I believe Mrs. Usavage was next in line.
So I saw that, you know, the market pay range that we came up with came from the PSBA study. That's great. I was just wondering, based on Mrs. Dirov's question, does CRES have data for us in what they do pay at other districts, the shortages at other districts, maybe different programs or different benefits they give them?
Absolutely. So and having, and I don't recall all of them, but I will say that we do provide sick days where others tend to don't give sick days. But at the same time, our pay rate is pretty low. For registered nurse, other places pay 28, 29. And I think it's important to note sort of, where Dr. Bergman had used the 5 counties that are nearby. So the school districts that Crest has partnered with are within those areas as well. Yeah. So if you think about, I just think about one particular nurse who's been with us for almost 19 years, and she's at 25.44. So.
I believe it was Mr. Lewis has his hand up, and Ms. Deeroff is next.
Okay, I don't have a problem with paying them, getting them all up to midpoint. However, what are you gonna do with the person that's been here for, I think you said, 18 years or something?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have somebody that's here for a year or two, and you're gonna pay them $25.50. That
Absolutely.
doesn't seem right, and I think we're gonna have a problem there.
No, I think what we talked about, and maybe Dr. Benton can elaborate a little bit more, but
We did talk about it, and this is a corrective action for
now.
And we have to build in a methodology to make the adjustment in the budget process, because we have to talk about how we do that and to make it equitable, and we don't have that answer yet, but we want to be able to look every person in the eye and say, why do we differentiate? So the conversation with those people is the next correction will be a part of the budgetary process. But this is a corrective action as a stopgap right now to try to stop the drain, and then be able to say to them that through the budget process, we're going to make a correction based on some type of methodology that we come up with in a process so that it can be applied no matter what going forward.
So what you're saying, if I understand you correctly, you'll bring your thought process is to bring them up to the $25.50 now, no matter if they were here 1 or 2 years or they're here 18 years, and you don't think you're going to lose anybody.
At this point, no, we don't, because again, the conversation is we're going to come and make the correction in the budgetary process. This right now is the quickest way to do it because it fits within the framework of what the thought process is right now. Our target is midpoint for everyone, and then we need to have it consistent, because what we do for them will be a precedent setting, because you will have this problem with other groups. Remember, you have,
Before and we still have it.
my point is, if you go back to the slide, you have a number of people in the overall compensation study who are below. So if I make up something now and it doesn't work for all of them, I'm going to be making up different models, and we need time to figure out and get you all approved what that's going to look like. This is just an emergency stopgap, because someone could argue, why are you doing them now and not everybody else also? We need to create a methodology that we can apply, because you already got, I think, 15-point-something% below the minimum. It said on the last slide. So we need to think this through and get the board to buy in, because it's a wholesale methodology that we have to address for the compensation correction.
So what you're saying, again, if I understand you, you want to do this to all groups to bring them up at one time.
What I'm saying is, this is a corrective action for the nurses right now. And I think this will help us stave off the exodus right now. Saying to them too that then the methodology built into the budget process is what we have to figure out for the whole compensation study. If I start making a major wholesale correction without a thoughtful process, then I go and so you got the issue with custodians. What's going to be the methodology for them? Remember, you got all those people in the ranges, the 1 through 9, and 15% of them are even below the minimum overall.
I realize that, but if I was a custodian, I would say, why are you doing the nursing staff first and the paras? So when is it going to be my turn? Is this just another? I would have a lot of questions.
And I just answered that question earlier in saying, because of the crisis and the medical intervention and other safety factors that are happening right now, This is why we're taking corrective action. When you look at that box, those 9 things, there's a lot more critical factors that a nurse has that if we don't address it, that are life-threatening potential to students. So that's an example. If you look at that matrix, can you go back of the 10 areas? Yes, all the way to the beginning.
Sorry. Thank you.
Look at those when you talk about compensable factors. There are some critical things that nurses hit that a custodian doesn't. So as a person, I value you, but I got some life, health, safety issues that are critical every day. If we don't have someone and a kid has a serious asthmatic attack or something, and we don't have the right medical personnel, that's probably overly simplified, but an example of it. Okay, we have compliance issues with one-to-one for kids who are high impact with special needs situations that are every day, that show up to school every day. There's a high degree of litigation that could happen with health care services. There's special ed compliance that are triggered. And there's a lot more regulations for credentialing and certification that Dr. Kim went through that we're facing.
Ms. Darrell, anything further? Okay, we'll go to Mr. Elsier.
So I certainly support and understand this piece on the staff nurse. I think what may help the board out is to come up with a plan, and I sense that there's already been discussion on it based on what I'm hearing for the other job descriptions in this support staff. So whether it's paraprofessionals, custodians, electricians, HVAC, whatever. So I think it would be good to have a timeline plan, and if it's over the next 12 months or 18 months or whatever it is. And I think the point was made earlier that this isn't saying that one group is more important than another or valued more than another. It's all about mitigating the risk. It's all about addressing, in this case, student safety and health and all that. So it may just help to have that plan at some point for the board.
And I want to be clear because
I
don't want people to walk away from that question. When you look at those 9 factors: base job knowledge, frequency of contact, okay, a responsibility for welfare of others, the confidential data. Their rating factor is much more critical, based on using industry standard 9 compensable factors, so it's not just what Dana Benton thinks about it. The analytical demands that is put on independent judgment is like significantly raised for a nurse with regards to responding to issues for students. So it's those factors that made the difference when we talk about a range 1 and a range 9. So they're at their salary range and scale is higher because they actually hit higher on those rating factors. That's the difference of why they are being addressed now. The point I was making, though, is to do something to address for longevity and all those things, we have to figure that out with regards to when you look at that page, you see the minimum, midpoint, and max, and then you go to slide 8, it looks like. 15.58% are below the minimum, and 11.56% are above the max. That is the bigger conversation that has to be planned out and discussed, which would then correct that 19-year nurse compared to the other ones potentially. And so we need to go through a process that you all buy into and approve before we do that and build it into the budget process. I mean, that correction could be anywhere from, on estimate, I'm telling you, I can see right now probably $60,000 to $100,000 correction easily, based on just a quick look when I saw the data. So the conversation is, do we build it and try to do it at once? Do you do it in a scalable process? Again, what do you do with the people who are above? So that you don't penalize them, but you can't keep, that same problem is going to grow. They're going to be above the industry max, there's a cost factor to that. So we don't have a complete methodology, and I don't want to create one just for nurses and it's different for these. And then we're going to get into people saying, wait a minute, you did a corrective action plan that was more than just the midpoint issue, which, by the way, I'm doing a midpoint only because of the compensable factors that says this is a critical situation we're facing right now. And now you're going to do something different for us? And if it doesn't benefit them, then they're really going to be upset. If I say, oh, we're going to change it now because it's not something we believe we want to pay.
Any further questions from our members? Okay, Dr. Kim, anything further on this?
Not on the presentation itself. Again, it's something that we would like to bring to the next voting meeting. So,
With a concrete, we know what the number is. You got an estimate. Carol will bring a solid number on this for you to approve, as well as we, like I said, the sub issue to try to come up with a plan. But part of the challenge is, okay, how do we pay for it and work within our allocated expenditures? So HR and finance are working to make sure all the numbers jive with each other.
so is this where you do a thumbs up kind of a deal?
Yeah, it seems that administration wants to bring us to the meeting of the 22nd. Is there any objection from our members to take this to the 22nd of October? Okay, then let's take it forth. Oh, you have a question?
Not about the near-term thing. I guess I just wanted to touch bases again. I know this will be part of the budget process, having the greater plan, if you will. What kind of resources do we need resources to help with that? Or are you getting that through CRESS or BCIU? Or do we have the resources to actually do a good job at that?
Well, and that was what I mentioned, that I
Dr.
believe that I
Bagley.
wanted to reach out to Dr. Breckman and come back and be a part of that process, because she has, once she did the data presentation, and then she's worked with a number of districts so that we can talk about the methodology that has been used and what's been most common and those types of things, and a system that we could build with a third neutral body who, at the end of the day, we're the client, but she can bring concepts and ideas. And again, she tends to be a well-regarded, respectable person, and the board has seen her work, so you're comfortable with her.
I apologize if I missed that comment earlier. Thanks.
If Mr. Foose has a comment.
Yeah, I just think it's important going forward in this process that we recognize that we're being presented with a problem that's fairly holistic. We're looking at the entire range of support staff, and within that, it sounds like we're taking kind of a risk-based approach, because we can't wait to try to address it in one fell swoop, because in the meantime we still have these immediate needs, and I think we do a little bit of a disservice trying to pit one group versus another by saying, why are we addressing this one? It should be that one. I think we recognize that they're all valued and play an important role in the district, but we need to start taking steps, and that's where I think the risk-based approach comes into play. And I think you articulated why the nursing staff is being targeted for that move up front. So.
Okay, it seems that we're going to leave that section of the agenda and move on to the parent and community intergovernmental section of our agenda. And we're going to have Allison Moyer presenting on communications and marketing update.
Are you plugged in there, or?
She just needs to. So I don't know how this typically goes, but I do know that it is 9:15. So I think we're going to make a little adjustment here. Make this go a little faster. It was intended to be interactive. But we'll skip some of the interaction, get to the heart of the matter, and if you guys have questions, we'll address those. What? I know. And in fact, I'll be really honest, I'm comfortable if there are pressing questions that you have in walking away from this and talking to you about what you want to know tonight versus what 10 pages I thought you might want to know. So if there are questions up front about what's happening with communications, I'm happy to address those tonight and let people go home and get some rest. I also know that after 9:30, we kind of lose interest at some point. We've been going at it for a little while. So I'd prefer, if you guys are all comfortable, if there are questions out there right now about things that are happening or that you've seen happen that you'd like me to talk about and how we got to there, I'm glad to do that. Otherwise, I think what I'll do is just talk about my philosophy a little bit, and then you guys have a list of everything that's on my plate already. So, questions to start, or I'll jump off with just jump off? Okay. All right, just a little bit about my arrival. The position had been empty for 6 months when I got here. And coming into the role, one of the biggest things that was a topic of conversation even during my interview process was our new administration. The big four, so to speak, of that group. Mr. Stout was the most tenured at 10 years with the district, though not necessarily local to the district. And so one of the things we were facing was an understanding of our community, the community that they came to. And I like to say that we're unique. It's varied, it's different. There's a way we all talk to each other. We're all related somehow. It's 3 degrees of separation instead of 6. And so I joked a lot during the interview process that if something happens to one of us, it also happens to the next 10 people in line, because we spend so much time together. We're all in each other's business all the time. We all know each other. We all know each other's kids. We know your parents. We know your grandparents, all of that. So we were looking at situations where, and Dr. Kim knows I was going to talk about this even though she's not here. We joke that when Dr. Kim and I have conversations, we're talking Girl Shop versus Panera. It's just a different approach. It's not right or wrong. It's just what you're used to. And I look at us as being very unique in that we're a community where we're 4 and 5 generations deep as the norm. As opposed to people grow up here and leave and 1 or 2 people stay. We either stay or we come back. And so it presents unique communications challenges. And how we view things and being entrenched in things that are not always as progressive as other communities. So there was this understanding of community that was not necessarily there. We sit in meetings. I remember one at Middle School East where Andy, Rupert, and I, who've been here our entire lives, were talking about things, and the administrators in the room were like, "Are you serious? That happens here? You all know each other that well?" And so that was a challenge we were facing, is how do we bridge that gap? How do we make communication easier? One of the things, too, was the financial, being in a meeting with Dr. Bedden and a member of the foundation's board. You know, Dr. Bedden's like, we've communicated to everybody that our financial status, and we sent home this four-sided document, and the board member saying, but it's a 4-sided document. And Dr. Bedden was talking about the Act 1 index, and if we had followed it, we would have had 9 million more, and if we had followed it with exceptions, we'd be at 30+ million more. And the gentleman in the room was like, why don't you just say that? And so it was interesting coming in, knowing all of that in the background. We were relying on our superintendent as communicator, whether it be social media, whether it be letters home, whether it be newsletters. That was Dr. Bedden's role when I got here, which doesn't leave a whole lot of room for the big stuff. So kind of getting him out of that role and getting me into that role instead was a big factor coming in. We had lost the support of some of the district learning community, in that there'd been so much transition by the time that I got here, not just from a communication standpoint, but from an administration standpoint. And each new administration that comes in has a slightly different twist, right? So then you have turnover, and things get lost or miscommunicated or lost in translation from one administration to another. And so people were looking at us and saying, we don't believe what you have to say anymore. So we were looking at that. With all of that going on, we're facing multiple high-profile decisions. Are we going to close a school? We're in a financial crisis. We have contract negotiations going on, and a lot of big factors, and your community's already questioning you and where you're coming from. Then we had the challenges of a new website and Infinite Campus. When I got here, we were just at the end, I believe, of the 3 weeks delay that was out of our control. So we were way behind in terms of people being able to register their kiddos. We had rolled out a new website without a communications person for content. So the IT department did a beautiful job of rolling out a new website with a great new look and a new format that looks a whole lot like a lot of other districts. So it looks more industry standard. But there really was no one to help with content or, making sure that when you go to the special education page, you see all of their contacts and what they're responsible for. And when you go to human resources, you see the same thing. Or when you go to the business offices page, you see the same thing. So between Infinite Campus being delayed and that putting a lot of pressure and the fact that things weren't consistent, that presented its own challenges too. And finally, there was a lot of talk about the fact that the financial and human sides of the business were out of balance. There's a lot of focus right now on finance with good reason. But all of that focus on finance, we were losing people because we weren't touching them personally. And at the end of the day, humans are responsible for this business. And so we were feeding them financial information, but not necessarily recognizing their efforts and boosting them up at the time. So when I got here, I had some thoughts ahead of time. Some things that come up during the interview process about how does this not become personal for me with all of my ties to the community and being a parent and being an employee and all of those things. And it made me take a look at how do I not take this personally? And how do I not let this be about what people say back or not agreeing? So I think the first thing is that at the end of the day, my job is to support the district. You will find very few people, probably none in this room, who really know where I stand on the big topics. If you come to me and ask me a question about what's your opinion on Pine Forge, my opinion doesn't matter. Honestly, at the end of the day, I represent the district, and there are two sides to every story, and there are going to be, for lack of a better way to put it, winners and losers in each other's minds. There are people that no matter what decisions we make aren't going to be happy, but it is not my job to share my opinion. It is my job to share information. I refer to the 5% threshold, particularly with regard to social media, which is where we're getting the biggest hit right now. If negativity or comments that are deemed that one could take personally or that seem to be very negative or even attacking, if it's 5% or less, I owe it to the 95% to stay out of that. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, which skips to another one of my philosophies. They don't have to agree with us. I don't think those comments should be taken down. I don't think that there's any reason not to recognize the fact that groups of people are going to think about things differently. If I were a parent at Pine Forge, I'd probably have a different opinion than if I'm a parent somewhere else. There's passion in these decisions for some people. There's a group of people who are extremely passionate about it. There's a group of people who are completely indifferent. And there's a group of people who just don't care at all because they're not impacted. On the flip side, if the decision's made to keep Pine Forge open, the passion shifts, and we have to be aware of that. The passion then becomes the right-sizing project, a bigger portion of kids being right-sized, and now we have kiddos who are moving to Pine Forge from other buildings. And so you shouldn't know where I stand. You're entitled to opinions, and those opinions are going to change depending on what the circumstances are. I try to compensate the negative because I believe that every day is a celebration. There is something to celebrate in this district every single day. There is something to celebrate at every building every single day. And in light of some things that have been happening with Facebook in particular and doing some research, I'm not there yet. A district should be posting, according to the experts, a district should be posting 2 to 3 times a day and sharing information. I'm at a little over 1 post a day since I got here, but my goal long term is there should be more to celebrate than there should be to be upset about. We're just not there yet. We're making significant progress. Our reach is far more significant than it was even a year ago, just over the August to October 11th timeframe. But I believe that every day is a celebration. I've been saying that since my first interview. I also believe that there is a component of this business that is about family. I don't go to everything that's happening in the district. I've really increased my presence, but I don't go to everything that's going on in the district. And what I don't go to are things that are for building families unless I'm invited. I'm not going to show up at Washington Elementary School's back to school night that is a family oriented event. It's typically a picnic or a food event that's for families, siblings, parents, all of that, unless I'm invited. I was invited, I went, and I stayed for about 15 minutes. But I feel like showing up for something like that is like ringing somebody's doorbell on Christmas Day and asking to eat dinner. There are some things that are bonding that aren't about having somebody there to take pictures. There are times it's appropriate to share the pictures and I'll share them later. But I want to respect and find the balance where I'm not charging in the door at the wrong moments. Because every now and then something just needs to happen, and it needs to be about what's going on in that building, not about what I want the rest of the world to know about that building. And the last thing came to me last week as we were working our way through the Halloween post on Facebook and what I will refer to as the epic fail of that post. We make mistakes. It doesn't matter how much I think about it. I'm going to make mistakes. We're going to need to circle back. We're going to need to take things down. We're going to need to apologize. But one of the challenges we face as a school district, and other businesses do too, and school districts do too, is that Facebook is social media. But I want to use Facebook as a one-way tool. And so Facebook isn't going to behave the way I want it to behave because I'm using it for an unintended purpose. The purpose of using Facebook is to share information and is for us to be social. But if I want to just share information, I'm not being very social. So it has given me a way to go back and look at Facebook and say, okay, how can I get this as close to what I want as possible and yet follow the Facebook rules, which say I should engage, and there are times that I should comment. There are times that I should take down posts because they don't support what this organization has in place in terms of their vision, mission, and goals and how we treat people. So instead of focusing so much on making all of our Facebook pages look the same and making sure that every school has a Facebook page, I want to go back and set our standards first and give us a way to moderate. So I've been doing a lot of research on how do you set up your role as a moderator on Facebook and let it be what it's supposed to be and take into consideration how we want to use it. And there are a lot of great examples out there about this is what we do on our page. and kind of set up your moderator role. These are the rules for our page that say that we're not going to curse. And if you curse, it's going to come down, even if you spell it wrong, to get it through the Facebook language moderation tool. We're not going to, in essence, call each other names. We're going to play nicely in the sandbox so that when we start calling each other names like idiot or bully or any of that, I can come back to you and say, we clearly said these are the rules, so I can take your comment down and leave everybody else's up. Because there's validity even in what happened with the Halloween posts, or what happened on a page where Dr. Bedden shared the vision, mission, and goals video, and it got into this 4-person back and forth, 60-some comments, and they were calling each other names, and I went back and said, I'm taking all the comments off this post. There were some valuable comments in there, but right now I have no way to not take down everything. So I need to find a way to make a square peg fit in this Facebook round hole, which is the way to communicate. It's the way we're getting to people. It's how we're getting people's attention. So that's kind of where we started and my approach. I've shared a whole lot of information about what's going on now. We've seen improvement in our Facebook numbers in particular. Return on investment and the numbers are one of the things on my plate that I don't get to because I think communicating right now is more important and impacting our image and getting the perception to where it needs to be. So I will have better information for you on that particular subject in the coming months. But in the interest of 15 minutes, I'm going to wrap up what I have to share tonight, as you all have the presentation, and the presentation's available to the public. We can talk about it anytime. You can send me questions anytime you want. But if you have questions for me for tonight, I am willing to answer anything you have for me right now. Otherwise, I'm going to turn off the microphone and let people get out of here. So any questions at this point?
I just wanted to thank you for coming and sharing this about yourself. That's what I wanted to hear tonight, is a little bit of getting to know you, because as you so eloquently stated it, what you're doing is very, very important for this district.
Thank you.
Just looking ahead to your future slide, one of the things, of course, is the overall communications plan, and you added with standards. What's our sense of timing on that plan? This may have been mentioned before, and I apologize if I...
So as Dr. Bedden and I were talking about this presentation last week, that's not even on my radar yet. And not to say that it's not on my radar. I'm aware that it's extremely important. I'm getting samples from principals. Hey, did you see this? This is how we should handle emails. Another district says it is important, and it needs to be done. The importance is not lost. I believe in my approach to communication that getting us through the next couple of months and what's coming is more crucial than me saying I have to, me or anyone else saying I have to say it exactly this way. That we're facing challenges in the next couple of months that are going to require a lot of attention from a communication standpoint. So when it does fit in, I want to get on it. I have sample plans. I have recommendations from principals. Same thing with the crisis management plan. I understand the importance of that. I learned that very quickly in the last 2 weeks with the little boy we couldn't find for several hours. From a personal standpoint, for me, when I posted that post, it was really difficult for me. And I shared with Dr. Bedden, I was expecting to be the professional I needed to be, and I became the mom of a child at Middle School West. And it was really hard for me to get that communication out. I was making mistakes. I was posting on the wrong page. I was doing things. And so for me, that's also as high a priority, if not even more, than the standards for communications going out of the district at the moment, because from a personal perspective, I could have handled that much more effectively. Not necessarily what people saw or what happened, but I know that that was actually one of the most difficult things I've faced since I got here, was how do I do this quickly? I need to keep my emotions out of this. I need to think straight. I need to deliver an effective message. And then I needed to go back and clean it up in the excitement of having found the kid and finding myself going, I can't imagine what that mom just went through. It was almost as difficult to take it back and say everything is great as it was to say we need your help. So I kind of lumped those two together, and if I had to put a little bit of priority on one versus the other, crisis management would actually come before, just because I demonstrated to myself what everybody else goes through when a crisis happens, and how in the moment sometimes it is really hard if you don't have a place to start or an example to go look at.
Although I believe that a crisis management plan is still part of the overall communications
Yeah.
plan, but I understand the urgency of some of our near-term communications. Thank you.
I'm curious what level of responsibility you've taken on at the various levels, district-wide versus taking, communication for different buildings or activities and things like that. How much autonomy is there at those various levels? How much are you trying to handle? And because obviously you can only do so much, but if we're looking to, we want the unique personalities to come out, but we also want a unified message, which I would imagine would be part of your responsibility. So where does that overlap and where does it diverge?
So where we are right now is that I have met with most of the building principals to talk about where they are. They all have a very varied approach as to what they're comfortable with in terms of delivering messages, keep me away from social media. I love social media, I don't want to touch it. I don't want my own page can I have my page and I want my password yesterday? So what I'm trying to do right now, there are a couple things. I have increased my building presence, period. I have been at every building multiple times. There are some instances where they send me information and their information I turn around and send out. There are some instances where I develop my own. Some buildings are much more responsive in terms of I have this going on at my building versus I have that going on at my building. Some people respond, some people don't respond right now. And so what I'm trying to find is a balance and equity, and how do I bring on I'm really not comfortable with sharing a whole lot of information because I'm worried I'm going to upset people, versus sure, you can share anything you want. So what I'm doing is I reach out to the buildings every couple of weeks, to the building principals and assistant principals, and say, hey, what's going on at your buildings? For right now, I am honoring the requests I get, and people I don't hear from, I'll just be like, hey, is anything going on? What do you want me to feature? What do you want me to highlight? So moving forward, I want to develop a plan where I basically have building ambassadors who all have access to building Facebook pages and things like that, where they can either submit information to me and I can turn around and put it out, or they can start doing that for themselves at their building levels. That's one place, though, where I believe standards are really important, is social media. And so for right now, I am pretty much controlling that content. A lot of what happens is we put it on the district page and then they share it to their schools' pages, with one or two exceptions. So long term, once standards are set for that, and that will probably also, that's a project I'm working on, is the Facebook project, and how do we do this? Every front page is going to look the same. It's going to have the same moderator comments on it. The communications, the plan is that all communications come into an email address that I monitor, in order not to bog down the principals and the people responsible for it, and for me to sort through it and say, yes, this needs to go back to the building. But then long term, we want them to have their own pages and to be posting things about events at their schools. The other thing I'm trying to be really careful about is equity. And that's where I got into trouble with Halloween, actually, is that my intent for that message was the whole district's going to be the same. And it wasn't received that way, unfortunately. And so that's one of the things I want to make sure of, is that if we say that every building's going to have a Facebook page and they're going to update information, I want to make sure that we don't have a building that's not posting at all, because they're worried about it, afraid of it, or they just don't see the need, versus a building that's posting once a day or once every other day. So there's a lot that goes into it, but for right now, I'm doing a lot of the outreach. Long term, my hope is to push it out. And one thing that I do, because you're right, there needs to be some uniqueness, is if somebody sends me something about an event. One of the ones I can think of was Jeff Brunner at the high school, when they did that local chorus mini camp, and there were all different schools. He sent me an explanation of what I was coming to. I literally cut and paste his language, because he can say it better than I can. It's his event. I'm just coming to take pictures and to cover it and to share the joy. But it's his event. And so as often as I can, I try to use their language when they send me stuff. So does that answer your question? Okay.
Answers that question. I don't want to keep us here too long.
I just would like to point out that this is this is Mr. Foose stretching the meeting.
I could
teasing.
I could take this. We could go on for days, really.
Yeah, I could too.
So the other, I want to get to a couple other that I think are at the top of my list, and I can save some of the others for later. But one of the things that I tried to do before, that I still think I never quite got to, and I think you're probably better positioned to do it. The communication pathways for community members, parents, and what have you, who they should be reaching out to based on what their question or the topic is something that I think we still need people to have a better understanding of.
Right. So that is a huge issue. And I think one of the things that, as things progress, we want to communicate is about the chain of command. To me, even take it back as a parent, okay? I need to start with my child's teacher, if that's the issue. And then I need to ask for the building level support. And then I need to ask for the next level of support. That's a huge concern of mine from a communication standpoint, is that you need to follow, you need to follow, for lack of a better way of saying it, the chain of command and go up. And some of it's about respect, number one. Some of it is about every issue can't end up on the superintendent's desk. As we roll things out and make announcements on, for example, Facebook, at the appropriate times, I'm starting to share who you need to contact. So if it's a post that impacts most of the district or the greater portion of the district, I keep going back to Halloween just because it's so fresh. But when we took Halloween down, the second post specifically said, if you have questions or concerns, this isn't the platform anymore. Come to me directly and ask me the question. Because the other thing is, when it's something like that, then I can filter it to the right place if it escalates. November 5th is a good example. When we released the first statement about the half day, it honestly is the first time anybody has said anything back in response and hasn't put it in the comments. But they asked questions about, they wanted to know about what was going on that we needed training immediately. One of them asked a question. You had several days before school. You have the 14th. Why now November 5th? Well, the answer was that the days before school were planned. The real crux to the matter is that we were addressing some concerns that have come up since school started, and the 14th was planned and paid for with a guest speaker, and an entire day planned for? And so those are questions I can answer. And so it is looking at there's pretty much an open door policy here anyway. If you ask somebody a question, you're going to get an answer. But trying to follow the respectful chain of command is one. And then looking at the big picture, having stuff come into a central point that then the focus is, it gets out to the right person. So that's where we're at with that right now. But yes, there are, the other thing I'll say about that is the advisory committees, or councils, we're about to add a fourth. We have student advisory, we have parent advisory, we have teacher and staff, and we are starting a business advisory council. Their first meeting will be considered, they're going to receive information to join the council, and then their first meeting will be considered to be the October 28th meeting at West, where we do the one Boyertown Council meeting, to get them up to speed on where we're at, because they would be the last group that hasn't necessarily seen the presentation, and then gives us a kickoff point. The other thing we're doing this year that's a little bit differently is parent advisory and business advisory fall more under my purview, and Office of Teaching and Learning is more student and teacher and staff, but we're working to deliver the same message at each of the 4 meetings and schedule them close enough together that basically the same agenda is followed for all of those meetings and everybody's getting the same message, and then turning around and sharing it. So trying to do those things.
Right, rather than pose these as questions, I'm gonna do the rest as comments that are meant to be reflective, and you and I can talk about them sometime.
Okay.
Or we can bring them back to another.
Okay.
The one thing to consider, and I'm in your position, is the shift in trends and social media. I'm sensing. I know the younger folks, like my sister barely uses Facebook. We're 9 years apart. She's younger than me. Barely uses Facebook.
Correct.
She doesn't have any kids yet. So over time, that you may see that change. I'm sick of Facebook. So I'm sure we probably need some type of plan for if things start to shift away from there, which I anticipate that it will, that we have other means of communication that are as effective. On some of the recent ones that you brought up, the Halloween one in particular, I think one of the things that people, there's always going to be, you don't know what holes people are going to want filled until you put it out there, which is one of the vulnerabilities of your position. So I think one of the things that people probably missed in that one was that it was not impacting what the PTOs and PTAs were doing and were
Correct.
free to do. I think people probably have a better understanding of that now. But
Yes.
I think that was part of the backlash of that as well.
I agree.
The advisory committees, I really like that. I believe the foundation and the parent advisory committee is kind of joint hosting this upcoming
Correct.
seminar. I think that's a great use of the advisory committees.
Correct.
And I hope to see more of us leveraging we have those committees. They're providing feedback. They can be a great tool to help communicate outward as well, as getting their input, but also them communicating back out. And then lastly, I just want to say I think you've been doing a wonderful job. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Yes, Ms. Darrell.
I'd just like to know on the advisory councils that you have set up or that are set up, how do you find out who's on those? I've been asked by different people and I have no idea who's on. And how do you get to be on there? How's that selection made? Or
Sure. So I can comment on, I can directly comment specifically the school-related ones, and Dr. Bedden can jump in if he needs to. The principals have made the recommendations for the most part. So Parent Advisory Council, the principals get a meeting, get a message, an email message at the beginning of the school year, reminding them who they were the year before, asking if they want them to change, making recommendations, and then giving those names to us. In general, those are the names we use. They've been encouraged to pick a member of their PTA, PTO, HSAs as one of the people potentially, and then someone else from their building who they know is involved and is interested in what's happening in the school building. The student advisory ones, I don't want to comment on. I think those are principal selections as well, but Dr. Bedden can speak to that more than I can.
Yes, the Parent Advisory Council typically is driven by the principal. It is asked to, they can make it the PTA, or the PTA person can pick their designee, or in some cases, the principal may choose a different parent that they want. The students are chosen also and selected by the principals at the building level. They're asked to try to create a heterogeneous selection process, meaning we don't want just all of the top student also. So anytime they can have a student who is just, as long as they're doing okay and have good, attendance, and we ask them to a student who is just a general good person. You don't have to be the top person. They typically pick them for them. We stay pretty much out of it. The only thing I do, for example, at the first meeting with the parents, I polled the group to make sure there was at least one parent in that group that actually represented career and technical education and or special ed. So if it actually has a parent who has that representation, I do nothing. If there is not a parent, when they pick them, that can't speak to that area, then in the language, which is on the webpage, I will appoint someone and find someone, because I want that voice at the table within our parent group. But if you look up under the superintendent's page, there is descriptions and information about the expectations and the requirements. So for example, it says for the Superintendent's Parent Advisory Council that they are not to come to the meeting with the focus on their individual building, but how the building impacts the entire district. It is meant to be a two-way communication and a problem-solving think tank group. If they have particular issues that are specifically unique to their building, they're asked to talk to us directly or through the normal channels through that process. But it is about the district as a whole and your school and relative to the district improving and doing better. But there is a section on the superintendent's area that describes those advisory council.
All of them.
Mm-hmm. Should be.
With the exception of the business one that is not established
Business is
yet.
new. If you remember in last year's even the evaluation, that was a goal to establish, and we never got that one going. And we're actually looking at partnering via a collaboration with the Foundation for the Business Advisory Council rather than reinvent the wheel.
Thank you.
Any other questions? You can reach out to me anytime. Pick up the phone, shoot me an email, meet in person, whatever you'd like to do. One thing for you, Mr. Foose, one of the things I am looking at is making sure that long-term we get onto Instagram, which has a totally different impact. We have some clubs I know there's a club at West, and I know there's a club at the high school with regard to Instagram and getting up and running on those platforms, and using Twitter as an immediate emergency resource a little bit more.
And as you know, we do have Twitter.
We do.
The Instagram, just so you know, it was recommended by the students, so that was feedback from the students, and that's pretty much their dominant platform now.
And you can, there are ways you can cross-post across all those platforms
Yes.
at once.
Yes.
You can actually cross-post between them, like you said. You can do TweetDeck, where you can preset. She's not there yet, but I know about TweetDeck. Where you can actually post, but you also, believe it or not, you can actually directly post from board docs to any of your social media also.
Yes. Yeah. So those plans are in place. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Moyer before she leaves? Okay, well, the next item, I want to thank you. It was excellent tonight, and thanks for the great presentation. I'm sorry it had to be so short, and I want to thank my colleagues for the great discussions that we had on the other topics earlier with Dr. Kim. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda, of course, is committee comment, and I'm hoping that our committee members, due to the late hour, would withhold
the race
any
car.
comments unless they're extremely, extremely urgent. Otherwise, we could forego that due to the late hour. Thank you very much. And regarding announcements, we have a regular board voting meeting next Tuesday, the 22nd, at Middle School West. That starts at 7 o'clock. Is that correct? I think I'm correct. 7 p.m. And with that, if there's no objection, I'd like to ask for perhaps a general acclamation to adjourn. Thank you. Thanks to everybody.